You are now listening to The Osbornes by E.F. Benson. Chapter 9. Question of the title had at length been settled. The simplest solution was felt to be the best, and Mrs. Osborne need not have felt so strange at the thought of changing her name, for she only changed the Mrs. into Lady. The eminently respectable name of Osborne, after all, was associated, as seen on the labels in the fish market at Venice, with the idea of hardware all the world over, a thing which Mr. Osborne had been anxious to bring in, and, at the same time, it had a faintly territorial sound. Lady Osborne, however, was a little disappointed. She would so much have enjoyed the necessity of getting quantities of table linen with the new initial worked on it. As it was only necessary to have a coronet placed above it. Indeed, within a week coronets blossomed everywhere, with the suddenness of the coming of spring in the south. On the silver, on the hot water cans, on writing paper and envelopes, on the panels of carriages and cars, and an enormous one, cut solid in limestone, the delivery of which seriously impeded for a while the traffic in Park Lane, was hoisted into its appropriate niche above the front door of number 92 by the aid of a gang of perspiring workmen and a small steam crane. It had been a smart morning's work, so said Lord Osborne, who looked out from the Gothic windows of his snuggery every now and then to see how it was getting on, and it became even smarter in the afternoon when gold leaf had been thickly laid on it. It was on the evening of that day that Lady Osborne had only a family party. She had planned that from the very beginning of the settlement of the summer campaign, had declined a very grand invitation indeed in order not to sacrifice it, and was going to send it to the Morning Post and other papers, just as if it had been a great party. Lady Austell was there, and Jim, Dora and Claude, Uncle Alf, Pa and Mrs. Per, and her husband and herself. That was absolutely all, and there was nobody of any description coming in afterward. Nor was any form of entertainment, except such as they would indulge in among themselves, to be provided. The idea was simply to have a family gathering, and not heed anybody else, for just this one evening, to be homely and cosy and comfortable. So there they all were, as Lady Osborne thought delightedly to herself, as she sat down with Jim on her right and Alfred on her left, just a family party, and yet they were all folk of title now except Alfred. It showed that money was not everything, for Alfred was the richest of them all, while the Austells, who were the highest, were also the poorest. She had looked forward immensely to this evening, but not without trepidation, for if Alfred was worried he could spoil any party. Alfred, however, seemed to be in the most excellent humor, and when, as they sat down, she said to him, "Well, Alfred, it's your turn next to be made something," he had replied that he had just received a most pressing offer of a dukedom. And the witticism was much appreciated. There was no keeping relations apart, of course, since they were all relations, and Claude was sitting next his father, with Mrs. Per between him and Jim, and it was his voice that his mother most listened for with the unconscious ear that hearkens for sounds that are most beloved. He was apologizing to his father for the mislaying of some key. "I'm really awfully sorry," he said, "but I'm such a bad hand at keys. I never lock anything up myself. Everything's always open in the flat, isn't it, Dora? But I'm very sorry, Dad. It was careless." "Ah, well, never mind," said his father. "And I'm not one as locks up overmuch either. Give me the key of my wine cellar and my cash box, and the drawer of your mother's letters to me when I was courting her, and the tantalus, and the drawer where I keep my checkbook and cash box, and I don't ask for more. I'm no jailer, thank heaven. But don't you even have a key to your cellar, my boy?" "Oh, I suppose there is one, and I suppose Parker has it," he said. Jim, too, had caught some of this and turned to Lady Osborne. "By Jove, that's so like Claude," he said. Lady Osborne beamed delightedly upon him. "Well, and it is," she said. "There never was a boy so free with his things. Law, He used to get into such hot water with his father when first he went to Oxford. There was no question, as you may guess, of his being kept short of money. But naturally his father wanted to hear where it went, and there's no denying he was a bit extravagant when he first went up, as they say. But when Claude got his checkbook, to look where and how it had all gone, why, there wasn't as much as a date or anything on one of the bits you leave in. I never can remember the name. Counterfoils, suggested Jim. Yes, to be sure. And I'll be bound he doesn't enter half of them now. And his uncle here played him a trick the other day. Didn't pay in his quarter's allowance, did you, Alf? And Claude never knew till he was told. Just said he was hard up and didn't know why, bless him. Well, he being his father's son, it would be queer if he was tight-handed. Jim laughed. I shall be down on Mr. Lord Osborne like a knife, he said, if he doesn't pay me his rent. I'll be bound you will, and quite right too, for money is money when all's said and done, said Lady Osborne cordially. Well, I'm sure that sea trout is very good. I feel as I can take a mouthful more, Thorsby, and give Lord Austell some more. I'm sure I can tempt you, Lord Austell. Nothing easier, said Jim. Uncle Alf came and sat next Dora in the drawing-room when, after a rather prolonged discussion of the 40 port, the gentleman joined the rest of the circle again. I came up here from Richmond, making no end of smart speeches in the carriage, my dear, he said, in order to make Maria and Eddie jump, but I've not said one. She's a good old sort, is Maria, and she was enjoying herself so. My dear, what's that great big gold thing they've put up above the front door? Oh, a coronet, I think, said Dora. I thought it was, but I couldn't be sure. Lord, what a set out. But those two are having such a good time. I hadn't the heart to make them sit up. And I dare say they've got a lot of men in the House of Lords not half so honest as Eddie. I should never have forgiven you, Uncle Alf, said she, if you'd vexed them. Well, it's a good thing I didn't, then, said he. And what's going to happen now? You don't mean to say Mrs. Puss going to sing? It appeared that this was the case. Naturally she required a certain amount of pressing, not because she had any intention of not singing but because a little diffidence, a little fear that she had been naughty, and hadn't sung for weeks, was the correct thing. Uncle Alfred heard this latter remark. She's been practicing every day. Pa told us in the dining room, he said. Lord, if Sabine Court would paint her as she looks when she sings I'd give him his price for it. That woman will give me the indigestion if I let my mind dwell on her. Mrs. Puss sang with a great deal of expression such simple songs as did not want much else. Indeed, her rendering of Be Good, Sweet Maid, and Let Who Will Be Clee Heaver, was chiefly expression. There was a great deal of expression, too, in the concluding line, which she sang with her eyes on the ceiling and a rapt smile playing about her tight little mouth. One long sweet song, she sang on a quavering and throaty F, one long sweet song. And she touched the last chord with the soft pedal down and continued smiling for several seconds, with that lost look, as Pa described it, that Lizzie gets when she is singing. Her mother-in-law broke the silence. If that isn't nice, she said. And I declare if I know whether I like the words or the music best. One seems to fit the other so. Lizzie, my dear, you're going to give us another, won't you now? Lizzie had every intention of doing so, but again a little pressing was necessary, and she finally promised to sing once more, just once, if Claude would do something afterward. So she ran her hands over the keys, and became light and frolicsome, and sang something about a shower and a maid and a little kissing, which was very pretty and winsome. After that she sang again and again. Jim had seated himself opposite Dora, and in the middle of this their eyes met for a moment. A faint smile quivered on the corner of Jim's mouth, but the moment after Mrs. Purr came to the end of a song and he warmly complimented her. Eventually she left the piano and called upon Claude for the fulfillment of his promise. Claude on occasion recited. He did so now. The piece he chose was a favourite of his father's, a little hackneyed, perhaps, for it was the Sands of D, and Lord Osborne blew his nose when it was finished. "Thank ye, my boy," he said. "You said that beautiful. Just to think of it, poor thing, her caught by the tide like that, and her hair getting into the salmon nets. I'm glad we didn't have that before dinner. I couldn't have eaten a morsel of that salmon." "My dear, you're so fanciful," said his wife, "and it was sea trout. But Claude said it beautiful. I'm sure I've heard them at the music halls, often and often, not half so good as that, for all that they are professionals." "So that if your uncle cuts you off with a shilling, Claude," said his father, "you can still make a home for Dora. Hey, Dora." And then Pa did several very remarkable conjuring tricks, which nobody could guess. You put a watch into a handkerchief and held it quite tight, and then there wasn't any, or else it was a rabbit, or something quite different. Again, whatever card you chose, and wherever you put it back into the pack, Pa was on it in no time. Or you thought of something, and Pa blindfold, with the help of Mrs. Purr, told you what you had thought of. And the Zanzics were held not to be in it. After the strain and bewilderment of these accomplishments, it was almost a relief to sit down to a good round game, the basis of which was a pack of cards, some counters, a system of forfeits, and plenty of chaff. And about 12, after a little light supper, the party broke up, Alf driving down to Richmond, and Lady Austell, who had made up her little disagreement with Jim, dropping him at his rooms. It was but a step from Park Lane there, but they held a short and pointed conversation on their way. "A delightful, charming evening," she said, "all so genuine and honest, with no forced gaiety or insincere welcome. How happy and content Dora ought to be." "The question being whether she is," remarked Jim. "My dear, have you noticed anything?" asked his mother rather quickly. Certainly during that recitation she looked a little inscrutable. What a deplorable performance, was it not? And if that odious woman had sung any more, I think I should have screamed. But Dora and Claude? Do you think the dear fellow is a little on her nerves? "Yes, I think the dear fellow is a little on her nerves," said Jim, with marked evenness of tone. "Can you not imagine the possibility of that? Consider." It was very likely that Lady Austell considered. She did not, however, think good to inform Jim of the result of this consideration. "And he?" she asked. "I am not in his confidence," said Jim. "I am only in his flat. And here it is. Thanks so much, dear mother, for the lift. Won't you come in?" "No. I must speak to Dora," said she, as the brougham stopped. "I think that would be very unwise of you. She knows all you would say, about his honor, his kindness, and so on. But at the present moment I think she feels that all the cardinal virtues do not make up for things like that recitation." Lady Austell thought over this for a moment as Jim got out. "You are friends with Claude?" she asked. "Real friends, I mean." "No, I can't stand him, and I think he can't stand me." Lady Austell could not resist giving her son a little dab. "And yet you use his flat?" she said. "Oh, yes, and drink his wine and smoke his cigars. You would rather have liked the flat, wouldn't you? Perhaps he'll lend it you another time. He likes doing kind things that don't incommode him. I think he likes feeling it doesn't matter to him, and I feel that the fact that we dislike each other gives a certain piquancy to them. Good night. I'm so glad you liked your party. It is refreshing after the glitter and hollowness of the world to get close to family affection again." It seemed to her that a little flame of true bitterness, quite unlike his usually genial cynicism and insouciance, shone in these words. "Good night, dear," she said very softly. "I hope nothing has disagreed with you." Jim laughed a little to himself as he ascended the thickly carpeted stairs to the flat on the first floor, but the laugh was not of long duration or of very genuine quality. He felt at enmity with all the world in spite of the excellent dinner he had eaten. He felt that Dora was a fool to let little things like that recitation, come between her and the immense enjoyment that could be got out of life if only you had, as was the case with her, a limitless power of commanding its pleasures. And yet, if those pleasures were to be indissolubly wrapped up with an Osborne environment, he felt he almost understood her absence of content. To put a case, if he was given the choice of going to Newmarket tomorrow with Lady Osborne in her £2,000 70-horsepower Napier, or of travelling there third class at his own expense, what would he do? Certainly, if the choice was for one day only, he would go in the car, but if the choice concerned going there every day for the rest of his life, or hers, the question hardly needed an answer. The thing would become unbearable. And Dora had to go, not to Newmarket only, but everywhere with Claude. And for himself, he would sooner have gone anywhere with Mrs. Osborne than with him. It is more blessed to give than to receive. In many cases it is certainly easier to give with a good grace than to receive in the same spirit. And if the gift is made without sacrifice, it is, unless the recipient is genuinely attached to the giver, most difficult to receive it charitably. It may be received with gratitude if it is much wanted, but the gratitude here is felt not toward the giver, but toward the gift. Toward the giver there is liable to spring up, especially if he is not like before, a feeling compared with which mere dislike is mild. It was so with Jim now. He squirted some whiskey into a glass, put a lump of clinking ice into it, and added some Perrier water. All these things were Claude's, so was the chair in which he sat, so was the cigar, the end of which he had just bitten off. This latter operation he had not performed with his usual neatness. There was a piece of loose leaf detached, which might spoil the even smoking of it, and he threw it away and took another. They were all Claude's, and if his drinks and his cigars had been made of molten gold, Jim felt he would sit up till morning, even at the cost of personal inconvenience, in order to consume as much as possible of them. The evening too, the charming, pleasant party, of which his mother had spoken so foolishly, had enraged him. There had been all there that money, the one thing in the world he desired so much, could possibly buy, and they had found nothing better to do than listen to ridiculous songs, hear an unspeakable recitation, and play an absurd round game. He hated them all, not only because they were rich, but because they were ill-bred and contented. Jovial happiness, the more to be resented because of its joviality. A happiness, he knew well, that was really independent of money, trickled and oozed from them like resin from a healthy fir tree. Happiness was their sap, their life, they were sticky with it. And he was afraid he knew where that came from. It came not only from their good digestion, but from their kindness, their simplicity, their nice natures. But if he at this moment had the opportunity of changing his own nature with that of any of these Osbornes, to take their kindness, their joviality, their simple contentment with and pleasure in life, with all their wealth thrown in, he would have preferred himself with all his disabilities and poverty. There was something about them all, some inherent commonness, that he would not have made part of himself at any price. Only a day or two ago he had been telling Dora to put the purse holders in a good temper at whatever cost, not to mind about their being not quite, and now he saw her difficulty. It was not possible even to think of them in a humorous light. They were awful grotesques, nightmares, for all their happiness and wealth, if you were obliged to have much to do with them. Jim finished his whiskey and took more. Of all those tragic and irritating figures, the one who appeared to him most deplorable and exasperating was Claude, on whom he was living at this moment, and on whom he proposed to live till the end of the month. After that he would no doubt search out some means of living on him further. Rich people were the cows provided for the poorer. It was quite unnecessary, because you fattened on their milk, to like them. You liked their milk, not them. And it was this very thing, this fact of his own indebtedness to his brother-in-law, that made Claude the more insupportable. That Claude was kind and generous, that Dora had married him, aggravated his offense, and the unspeakable meanness of his own relationship to him, in being thus dependent on him, aggravated it further. Yet his own meanness was part of Claude's offense. He would not have felt like this toward a gentleman. But Claude, as he had said long ago to his mother, was a subtle cad, the worst variety of that distressing species. So he lit another of his cigars. The butt of the one he had just thrown away had fallen inside the brass fender, and the Persian rug in front of the fender had been pulled a little too far inward, so that its fringe projected inside. The smouldering end fell on to this fringe, and Jim watched it singe the edge of the rug without getting up to take it off, justifying himself the while. The interior of a fender was a proper receptacle for cigar ends, and if the edge of a rug happened to be there too, it was not his fault. And the fact that he sat and watched it being singed was wholly and completely symptomatic of his state of mind. He liked seeing even an infinitesimal deterioration of Claude's property. What business had Claude with prints and Persian rugs and half-filled-in checkbooks? He was generous because the generosity cost him absolutely nothing. Had Jim been able to hear the conversation that took place in the drawing-room of number 92 after he and his mother had gone, his evil humor would probably have been further accentuated. Lord Osborne started it. "Well, give me a family party every night," he said, "and I ask for nothing more, my lady, though, to be sure, I like your grand parties second to none. Dora, my dear, that brother of yours is a sharp fellow. He beat us all at our round game. I hope he's comfortable in your flat, Claude? You've left some cigars and such like, I hope, so that he won't wish to turn out, saying there's more of comfort to be had at his club." Claude reassured his father on this point, and Mrs. Purr glided up to Dora. She usually glided. "What a dear Lord Ostel is, Dora," she said. "And so aristocratic looking. I wish I had a brother like that. Do you think that he liked my little songs? And I wondered if he would come down to Sheffield in the autumn. Has some good shooting, I believe, though I can't bear the thought of it. Poor little birds, to be shot like that when they're so happy. I always stop my ears if they are shooting near the house." "Lizzie, my dear, you're too kind-hearted," said Lady Osborne. "What would our dinners be like if it wasn't for the shooting? Perpetual beef and mutton, nothing tasty." Mrs. Purr wheeled around with a twist of her serpentine neck. "Ah, but you can never have read that dear little story by Gautier, or is it Dordet? About the quails," she said. "I have never touched a quail since I read it. But Lord Ostel, dear Dora, we were going to have a little party, very select, about the middle of September, and Purr and I wondered if Lord Ostel would come. There are the races, you know, for 2 days, and with 2 days shooting, and perhaps an expedition to fountains, I think he might like it. He told me he was so interested in antiquities. And if you and Claude would come too." Mrs. Purr broke off in some confusion. She had forgotten for the moment, and she drew Dora a little aside. "Dear Dora," she said, "I quite forgot. Quite. So stupid. But Claude, perhaps, if all is well? They are great friends, are they not? Claude told me that Lord Ostel was keeping his flat warm for him. So kind and so nice of Claude to lend it, too, of course." Then Lord Osborne's voice broke in again. "Yes, the family party is the party to my mind," he said. "No pomp, just a plain dinner, and a song, and a conjuring trick, and no fatigue for my lady, with standing up and saying glad to see you 1,000 times. Not but what she isn't glad, as we all are to see our friends. But Lord, Mrs. Oat, I beg your pardon, my lady, how nice to have a quiet evening such as tonight, with my Lady Ostel and her son just dropping in neighbour-like, and no bother to anybody. Purr, my boy, you've made a conquest of Lord Ostel. He was wrapped up in your tricks, and each puzzled him more than the last. As he said to me, you don't know what to expect, it may be an egg, or a watch, or the 10 of spades. Well, I expect it would take a professional to see through my tricks, said Purr, and even then I'd warrant I'd puzzle him as often as not. There's a lot of practice goes to each, and there's many evenings, when Lizzie and I have been alone, when we've gone through them, and she pulled me up short if ever she saw, so I might say, the wink of a shirt cuff. But they went off pretty well tonight, though I say that who shouldn't. And I'm sure I don't know what pleased me best tonight, said Lady Osborne, whether it was the conjuring tricks, or Liz's singing, or the sands of D, or the round game. Bless me! And it's nearly 1 o'clock. It's time we were all in bed, for there's no rest for anybody tomorrow, I'm sure, not after the clock's gone 10 in the morning till 2 the next morning and later. Lord Osborne gave a gigantic yawn. I'm sure I apologize to the company for gaping, he said, but it comes upon one sometimes without knowing. And what has my lady planned for tomorrow? As if it was me as had planned it, said his wife, when you would have half the cabinet take their lunch with you, and a mercy league of some kind in the ballroom in the afternoon. 300 teas ordered, and by your orders, Mr. O, which will but give you time to dress, if you're thinking to make a speech to them. But do be up to the time for dinner, for we sit down 30 at table at 8:15, and out of the ballroom you must go, for if the servants clear it and air it for my dance by 11 o'clock, it's as much as you can expect of flesh and blood. And she carries it all in her head, said her husband, as if it was twice 5's 10. Maria, my dear, you're right, and it's time to go to the land of nod. Not that there'll be much nodding for me. I shall sleep without them sort of preliminaries. Well, and I'm sure you ought to after all the snoring exercise you went through last night, said Lady Osborne genially. I couldn't have believed it if I hadn't heard it. There, my dear, it's only my joke. And they tell me it shows a healthy pair of lungs to make all that night music, as I may say. And, Dora, be sure as your brother knows his welcome to dinner as well as the dance afterward, in case I didn't say it to him. I can always find an extra place at my table for them as are always welcome. Lord Osborne got up. Not but what you didn't fair stick him over your conjuring tricks, he said. And did you cast your eye over the coronet I've had put up above the front door? It's a fine bit of carving. Well, good night to all and sundry. Claude, my boy, you take good care of and mind to put out the lights when you come to bed. 1 o'clock. I should never have guessed it was past 12. The Newmarket meeting began next day, and Jim was not put to the odious degradation of paying for his own ticket, as he motored down with a friend. No more delightful way of spending the morning could be desired than this swift progress through the summer air over these smooth roads, and that, with a confident belief in the soundness of his betting book and the anticipation of a pleasant and lucrative afternoon, entirely dissipated the evil humor of the evening before. After all, in this imperfect world, it was wiser to take the bad with the good, and if the manners and customs of the Osborne family got on his nerves, it must be put down to their credit, not to the aggravation of their offences, as he had been disposed to think last night, that they treated him in so open-handed a way. Certainly they would appear in a far more disagreeable light if they were close-handed with their money. It was, of course, a sin and an iniquity that other people should have money and not he. But since Providence, and that deplorable Derby week, had chosen to make this disposition of affairs, it was as well that certain mines of bullion should be accessible to him. And here already was the heath, and the crowds, and the roar of the ring. Like most gamblers, Jim, though practical enough in the ordinary affairs of life, had a vein of fantastic superstition about him, and it occurred to him after the first race, in which he had the good fortune to back the winner, that his luck had turned, and he cast about to think of the cause that had turned it. At once he hit on it. He had paid Claude back the sovereign which he had found on his dressing-table and had given to the cook. That had been a happy inspiration of his. The action itself had been of the nature of casting bread on the waters, for Claude probably was unconscious of having left a sovereign there, and in any case would not ask for it. And here, not after many days, but the very next day, he had picked up 50 of them before lunch. Apparently some sort of broad-minded guardian angel looked after his bets and his morals, and, if he was good, turned the luck for him, for this broad-minded angel clearly did not object to a little horse racing, and enabled him to back winners. And after this initial success, Jim went back to his friend's motor and ate an extremely good lunch. Whether the broad-minded angel looked back over Jim's past record and found something that he could not quite stand, Jim never reasoned out with any certainty. All that was certain was that after that first race the carefully made-up, almost gilt-edged book went to pieces. Once in a sudden access of caution he hedged over a horse he had backed. That was the only winner he was concerned with for the rest of the day. Jim returned to town that evening in a frame of mind that was not yet desperate, but sufficiently serious to make him uncomfortable. Outwardly, he took his losses admirably, was cheerfully cynical about them, and behaved in no wise other than he would have behaved if he had been winning all afternoon. He had promised to dine at the Savoy, but on arrival at the flat he found a telephone message written out which had come from Dora after his departure that morning, asking him to dine at number 92. At that his mood of last evening flashed up again. "I'll be damned if I ever set foot in that house again," he said to himself, and regretted into the telephone. There was a telegram for him as well. It was from a very well-informed quarter, giving him the tip to back Callisto, an outsider, for the big race tomorrow. He crumpled it up impatiently. How many well-informed tips, he wondered, had he acted on, and what percentage of them had come off? Scarcely 1 in 100. No, backing outsiders was a good enough game if you were on your luck, and also happened to be solvent. He did not go to Newmarket next day, but sat all afternoon in his club, making frequent journeys to the tape, that ticked out inexorably and without emotion things so momentous to him. It was a little out of order, and now and then, after the announcement Newmarket, it would reel off a rapid gabble of meaningless letters like a voluble drunkard, or give some extraneous information about what was happening at Lord's. Then it pulled itself together again, and he saw that Callisto had won. Harry Franklin was looking over his shoulder as this information came out, and gave a cackle of laughter. "Hurrah, fur coat for May and new gun for me," he said. "Lucky dog," said Jim. "I thought you never betted." "Oh, once in a blue moon. Moon was blue yesterday. Somebody gave me this tip last night, and I had a shy." "I didn't shy," said Jim. "Rather a pity. 25 to 1, wasn't it?" "Yes, that fiver of mine will go a long way," said Harry. "Come and dine tonight. Dora and Claude Osborne are coming." "Thanks awfully, but I'm engaged," said Jim. He went back to his flat when the last race was recorded to see just where he stood. He had nothing more on for the last day of the meeting, and thus his accounts were ready to be made up. A rather lengthy addition, with a very short subtraction of winnings, showed him just what he had lost. And he owed nearly £500 more than he could possibly pay. The exact sum was £476. It would have to be paid by Monday next. It was true in a sense, that, as he told Harry Franklin, he was engaged that night, though the engagement was to himself only. It was necessary to sit and think. The money was necessary to him, and necessity is a lawless force. The money had to be obtained. So much might be taken for granted. It was no use considering what would happen if it was not obtained. Therefore, all that might be dismissed, for it had to be obtained. That was the terminus from which he started. He had telephoned from the club that he would be in for dinner, and would dine alone, and Claude's admirable cook, it appeared, understood the science of providing single dinners as well as she understood more festive provisions. Dinner was light and short, and Parker, without prompting, gave him a half bottle of Veuve Clicquot, iced to the right point and no further, and a glass of port that seemed to restore him to his normal level. What he had to face was no longer unfaceable. He felt he could go out and meet necessity. Other possibilities detained him but little. It was no use applying to his mother for money, for he might as well apply to the workhouse, and he could not apply to the Osbornes. He tried to think of himself asking Claude to lend him this sum. He tried to picture himself going to Lord Osborne with his story. But the picture was unpaintable. It had no possible existence. And the other way, the way which already had taken form and feature in his mind, was not so difficult, far less impossible of contemplation, simply because his nature was not straight, and the moral difficulty of stealing appeared to him to be within his power to deal with. He had never been straight, but even now he made excuses for himself, said that it was a necessity that forced him into a path that was abhorrent to him. Perhaps he did dislike it a little. Certainly he did not take it for amusement. Simply there was no other way open to him. There remained only to consider the chances of detection. They did not seem to him great. The checkbook with which he would shortly be concerned had clearly been left in its drawer as finished with, for the last check was used, though not the one immediately preceding it. Claude, too, had almost bragged about his carelessness with regard to money, and the truth of his boast had been endorsed by his mother only 2 nights ago, when she told him how he had never noticed that his quarter's allowance had not been paid in. That was a matter of nearly £4,000, this of hardly more than the same number of hundreds. Besides, if it were detected, what would Claude do? Proceed against his wife's brother? He believed he need not waste time in considering such a possibility, for, to begin with, the possibility itself was so remote. Then for a moment some little voice of honor made itself heard, and he had to argue it down. Not to pay such debts, debts of honor, as they were called, was among those very few things that a man must not do, and for which, if he does them, he gets no quarter from society in general. No doubt he could get his debts paid if he went to the Osbornes, but that he could not do. It was much harder for him than that which he proposed to do. So the little voice was silenced again, almost before it began to speak. But it was used to being taken lightly, to be not listened to. He was not often at home in the evening, but when he was he usually sat in Claude's room, which, though small, was cooler than the southward-facing drawing-room, and he took his cigar there now. A tray of whiskey and Perrier had already been placed there, but since he did not wish to be disturbed he rang the bell to tell Parker he wished to be called at 8 next morning, and wanted nothing more that night. And then he took some writing paper from a drawer in the knee-hole table, and drew up his chair to it. He had found there also a carefully written-out speech by Claude, designed for his constituents. He read a page or two, and found it dealt with local taxation. Large sums like 5 million were written in figures. Smaller sums, as in phrases 5p in the pound, were written out in full. This was convenient. There was also a frequent occurrence of myself in the speech. Part of that word concerned Jim. And Claude wrote with a stylograph. There were several of them in the pen tray. Jim had used them regularly since he came into the flat. Dora was to call for him next morning at 12, with the design of spending the afternoon at Lord's to see the cricket, and, arriving there a little before her appointed time, was told that he was out, but had left word that he would be back by 12. Accordingly, since the heat was great in the street, she came up to the flat and waited for him there. She felt rather fagged this morning, for the last week had been strenuous, while privately her emotional calendar had made many entries against the days. That estrangement from Claude, that alienation without a quarrel, and therefore the more difficult to terminate, had in some secret way got very much worse. His presence even had begun to irritate her, and he certainly saw that irritation. It did not require much perspicacity, and spared her as much as he could, never, if possible, being alone with her. Instead he threw himself into the hospitalities of the house, looked after Mrs. Purr, taking her to picture galleries and concerts, until Purr had declared that he was getting to feel quite an Othello, and performed with zeal all the duties of a resident son of the house. And bitterly Dora saw how easy it was to him, how without any effort he caught the role. Like some mysterious stain, appearing again after years, the resemblance between him and his family daily manifested itself more clearly. The sight of the flat caused these thoughts to inflict themselves very vividly on her mind, and, sitting here alone, waiting, it was almost with shuddering that she expected Claude to enter. How often in these familiar surroundings she had sat just here, expecting and longing for him to come, to know that he and she would be alone together in their nest. And now the walls seemed to observe her with alien eyes, even as with alien eyes she looked at them. It was a blessing, anyhow, that they had gone to Park Lane. The dual solitude here would have been intolerable. She had not got to wait long, for Jim's step soon sounded in the passage. She heard him whistling to himself as he went into his bedroom, and next moment he came in. "I'm not late," he said, "so don't scold me. It's you who are early, which is the most outrageous form of unpunctuality. Well, Dora, how goes it?" She got up and came across the room to him. "It doesn't go very nicely," she said, "but you seem cheerful, which is to the good. Jim, it is so nice to see somebody cheerful without being jocose. We are all very jocose at Park Lane, and Claude flirts with Mrs. Per." Dora gave a little laugh. "I didn't mean to speak of it," she said, "and I won't again. Let's have a day off, and not regret or wonder or wish. What lots of times you and I have gone up to Lord's together, though we usually went by underground. Now we go in a great, noble motor. Let's have fun for one day. I haven't had fun for ages." Jim nodded at her. "That just suits me," he said. "I want a day off, and we'll have it. Pretend you're about 18 again and me 21. After all, it's only putting the clock back a couple of years." "And I feel 100, said Dora pathetically. "Well, don't. I felt 100 yesterday, and it was a mistake. Jim, I was so sorry about your bad luck at Newmarket. Somebody told me you had done nothing but lose. What an ass you are, dear. Why do you go on?" Jim's face darkened but for a moment. "It's nothing the least serious," he said. "I did have rather a bad time, but I've pulled through and have paid every penny. In fact, that is what kept me this morning. I hate to give away all those great, crisp, crackling notes. I hate it. And then on my way home I determined not to think about it any more, nor about anything unpleasant that had ever happened, and I get here to find you had come to the same excellent determination. Let's have a truce for one day." "Amen," said Dora. It is astonishing what can be done by acting in pairs. Dora would have been perfectly incapable alone of watching cricket with attention, far less, as proved to be possible, with rapture, and it might also be open to reasonable doubt as to whether alone Jim could have found any occupation that would have deeply interested him. But together they gave the slip to their anxieties and preoccupations, and Jim did not even want to bet on the result of the match. All afternoon they sat there, and waited till at 6:30 the stumps were drawn. Then Dora gave a great sigh. "Oh dear, it's over," she said, "and I suppose we've got to begin again. What a nice day we've had. I quite forgot everything." Jim came home rather late that night, and found letters waiting for him in the little room where he had sat the night before. There was nothing of importance, and nothing that needed an answer, and in a few minutes he moved toward the door in order to go to bed. And then quite suddenly, with the pent-up rush of thought which all day he had dammed up in a corner of his brain, he realized what he had done, and his face went suddenly white, and strange noises buzzed in his ears, and his very soul was drowned in terror. But it was too late. His terror should have been imagined by him 24 hours ago. Now it was authentic. There was no imagination required, and he was alone with it. Chapter 10. Claude, as became the future candidate for the constituency of West Brentwood, was sedulous and regular in reading the House of Common Debates, and 2 mornings later was sitting after breakfast with his Times in front of him, to which he devoted an attention less direct than was usual with him, for he expected every moment to be told that the visitor whom he was waiting for would be announced, and he could form no idea of what the visitor's business might be. Half an hour ago he had been summoned to the telephone and found that he was speaking to one of the partners in Grayson's bank, who asked if he could see him at once. No clue as to what so pressing a business might be was given him, and Mr. Humby, the partner who spoke to him, only said that he would start immediately. He had first telephoned, it appeared, to Claude's flat, and his servant had given him the address. In itself there was little here that was tangibly disquieting, for Claude stood outside the region of money troubles, but other things combined to make him, usually so serene, rather nervous and apprehensive. For the last day or two he had been vaguely anxious about his mother, who appeared to him not to be well, though in answer to his question she confessed to nothing more than July fatigue, while his relations with Dora, or rather his want of them, continued to perplex or distress him. She was evenly polite to him, she went out with him when occasion demanded, but that some barrier had been built between them he could no longer doubt. He had not only his own feeling to go upon, for his mother had remarked it, and asked if there was any trouble. Lady Osborne was the least imaginative of women, he was afraid, and her question had so emphasized it to his mind that he had determined, should no amelioration take place, to put a direct question to Dora about it. He would gladly have avoided that, for his instinct told him that the trouble was of a sort that could scarcely be healed by mere investigation, but the present position was rapidly growing intolerable. All these things made it difficult for him to concentrate his attention on the fiscal question, and it was almost with a sense of relief to him that the interruption he had been waiting for came. He shook hands with Mr. Humby, who at once stated his business. "I may be troubling you on a false alarm, Mr. Osborne," he said, "but both my partners and I thought that one of us had better see you at once in order to set our minds at rest." "You have only just caught me," said Claude. "I am going into the country before lunch." "Then I have saved myself a journey," said Mr. Humby gravely. He produced an envelope and took a cheque out of it. "The cheque came through today," he said. "It was cashed 2 days ago at Shepherd's Bank, quite regularly. But it is drawn by you to self over a week ago." That was a little curious, since cheques drawn to self are usually cashed at once. Also, though that is no business of ours, it is a rather large sum, £500, to take in cash. You have banked with us for some years, Mr. Osborne, and we find you have never drawn a large sum to yourself before. But the combination of these things seemed to warrant us in making sure the cheque was genuine. The handwriting appears to be yours." Claude looked at the date. "June 24th, he said. "I did draw a large cheque about that time for a motor car." "That has been presented. It was drawn to Daimler's," said Mr. Humby. Claude turned the cheque over. It was endorsed with his name, but search how he might he could not recollect anything about it. And slowly his inability to remember deepened into the belief that he had drawn no such cheque. "If you would refer to your cheque-book," said Mr. Humby, "we could clear the matter up. I am sorry for giving you so much trouble." "The question is, where is my cheque-book?" said Claude. "I came over here a week ago, but before that I was at my flat. But I will look." He went upstairs, into the sitting-room, which was his and Dora's. She was sitting there now, writing notes, and looked up as he came in. "Claude, can I speak to you for a minute?" she said. "Yes, dear, but not this moment. I have to find my cheque-book. Where do you suppose it is? One must attend to business, you know." "Oh, quite so," said she, and resumed her letter again. Claude's heart sank. Perhaps she wanted to speak to him about things that were of infinitely greater moment, and he had made a mess of it, repulsed her by his foolish speech. "Dora, what is it?" he asked. "Is it?" She must have known what was in his mind, for she made an impatient gesture of dissent. "No, if you can give me a minute later on, it will be all right," she said. His search was soon rewarded, but proved to be fruitless, for the cheque-book was a new one, and he had only used it for the first time 3 days ago. But perhaps she would remember something. "Dora, did I give you a rather big cheque for household bills or anything, while we were in the flat?" he asked. "Yes, I remember that you did," she said. "And I remember endorsing it as you drew it to me." "Why?" "Only that there is a cheque that I appear to have drawn for £500, just before I left the flat, and for some reason my bankers want to be sure that I did draw it." You mean they think that it may be forged?
Yes.
But who can have got hold of your checkbook? Asked Dora. You have found it, haven't you? Yes, but this is no use. The check in question was drawn before I began this book. I suppose I left it at the flat. Dora had continued writing her note as she talked, for it was only a matter of a few formal phrases of regret, but at this moment, her hand suddenly played her false, and her pen sputtered on the paper. And though she did not know at that second why this happened, a moment afterward she knew. Below his checkbook in the drawer lay Claude's passbook. It had been very recently made up, for his allowance from Uncle Alfred, paid on June 28th, appeared to his credit, and on the debit side a cheque to Dora of £150, cashed on the previous date. That, no doubt, was the cheque for books of which she had spoken. She had gone on writing again, and Claude apparently had noticed nothing of that pen splutter. Yes, here are cheques I have drawn up till the 29th, he said, and none of £500. It looks rather queer. I'll be back again in 5 minutes. I must just see Mr. Humby, and tell him I can't trace it. Claude went rather slowly downstairs again. The matter was verging on certainty. He had drawn a cheque for £500 on June 24th, and it had not been presented till 2 days ago. The cheque for the car was entered, and the cheque for books to Dora. He hated to think that Parker had forged his name, but if he had, good servant though he was, there was no clemency possible. May I look at the cheque again? He asked. He examined it more closely. I can find no trace of drawing any such cheque, he said, and I believe it is a forgery. It is very like my handwriting, but I don't believe I wrote it. That is what we thought, said Mr. Humby. Then what are you going to do? Asked he. Find out who presented the cheque, and prosecute. I am very sorry, it is an unpleasant business, but the bank can take no other course. He folded up the cheque again, put it in his pocket and left the room. But Claude did not at once go back to Dora. There had started unbidden into his mind the memory of a morning at Grota before they were married, of a game of croquet, of a sovereign. Next minute he too had left the room, and the minute after he was in the road, walking quickly to Mount Street. His old checkbook no doubt was there, and he would be able to find it. And all the way there, he tried desperately to keep at bay a suspicion that threatened to grip him by the throat. And upstairs Dora waited for him, the same doubt threatened to strangle her. Jim was out, but was expected back every moment, and Claude went into his small room, and began searching the drawers of his writing table. There was a sheaf of letters from Dora in one, a copy of his speech on municipal taxation in another, and in the third a heap of old cards of invitation and the butt end of his checkbook. Sun blinds were down outside the windows, the room was nearly dark, and he carried this out into the large sitting room and sat down to examine it. There was a whole batch of cheques, most of which he could remember about, drawn on June 22nd. Then came a blank counterfoil and then the last counterfoil of the book, bearing a docket of identification as cheque to Dora for £150. That was drawn on the 27th. He heard a step outside, the door opened and Jim entered. He was whistling as he came round the corner of the screen by the door. Then he saw Claude, his whistling ceased, and his face grew white. Once he tried to speak, but could not. Claude saw that, the blank face, the whitened lips, it was as if Jim had been brought face to face with some deadly spectre, instead of the commonplace vision of his brother-in-law sitting in his own room, looking through the useless but surely innocuous trunk of an old checkbook. And instantaneously, automatically, Claude's mind leaped to the conclusion which he had tried to keep away from it. But it could be kept away no longer, the inference closed upon him like the snap of a steel spring. In the same instant there came upon him his own personal dislike of Jim, and his distrust of him. How deep that was he never knew till this moment. Then came the reflection that he was doing Jim a monstrous injustice in harboring so horrible a suspicion, and that the best way of clearing his mind of it was to let the bank trace the check and prosecute. But he knew that it was his dislike of his brother-in-law that gave birth to this, not a sense of fairness. And on top of it all came the thought of Dora and his love for her, and mingled with that a certain pity that was its legitimate kinsman. The pause, psychically so momentous, was but short in duration, and Claude jumped up. His mind was already quite decided. It seemed to have decided itself without conscious interference on his part. "Good morning, Jim," he said. "I must apologize for making an invasion in your absence, but I had to refer back to an old checkbook." Jim commanded his voice. "Nothing wrong, I hope," he said. Again Claude had to make a swift decision. He could tell Jim that a check of his had been forged, and that the matter was already in the hands of the bank. That probably would force a confession, if there was cause for one. But it would still be his dislike, though he might easily call it justice, that was the mover here. There was a wiser way than that, a way that, for all the surface facet of it, held a nobler truth within. "No, nothing whatever is wrong," he said. "Excuse me, I must telephone to the bank, to say the check is all right. I'll telephone from here if you will allow me." The telephone was just outside and Jim heard plainly all that passed. The number was rung up, and then Claude spoke. "Yes, I'm Mr. Claude Osborne. I am speaking to Mr. Grayson, am I? It is the matter that Mr. Humby came to speak to me about this morning. Yes, the check for £500. I find I have made a complete error. The check was drawn by me and is perfectly correct. Yes. It was very stupid of me. Please let Mr. Humby know as soon as he gets back." "Yes. Thank you. Good morning." Claude paused a moment with the receiver in his hand. Then he called to Jim. "Can't stop a moment," he said. "I've the devil of a lot to do. Goodbye." He walked back again at once to Park Lane, still thinking intently, still wondering if he could have done better in any way. Honest all through, he hated with a physical repulsion the thought of what he felt sure Jim had done. But oddly enough, instead of feeling a crescendo of dislike to Jim himself, he was conscious only of a puzzled sort of pity. By instinct he separated the deed from the door, instead of bracketing them both in one clause of disgusted condemnation. And then he ceased to wonder at that. It seemed natural, after all. He went straight up to Dora's room, and found her still at her table with letters round her. But when he entered she was not writing, she was staring out of the window with a sort of terror on her face. Claude guessed what it was that perhaps had put it there, and what lurked behind that look of agonized appeal that she turned on him. "I'm sorry for being so long, dear," he said, "but I've been making a fool of myself. That check I spoke to you about is quite all right. I found the counterfoil in my old book at the flat. I drew it right enough. Mr. Humby expects a fellow to carry in his head the memory of every half-crown he spends." Dora gave one great sobbing sigh of relief, which she could not check. "I'm glad," she said. "I hated to think that Parker perhaps had gone wrong. One hates suspicion, and its atmosphere." Claude heard, could not help hearing the relief in the voice, could not help seeing that the smile she gave him struggled like mist-ridden sunlight to shine through his dispelled clouds of nameless apprehension. Nor could his secret mind avoid guessing what that apprehension was, for it was no stranger to him. He had been sharer in it till he had seen Jim, when it deepened into a certainty which was the opposite to that which at this moment brought such relief to his wife. The other certainty, his own, must of course be kept sealed and locked from her, and Claude hastened to convey it away from her presence, so to speak, by talking of something else, for fear that it might, in despite of him, betray some hint of its existence. "But there was something you wanted to speak to me about," he said. "Yes. It is about your mother. Do you think she is well?" "No, I haven't thought so for the last 3 or 4 days," said he.
What have you noticed?
I went into her room just now, said Dora, and she was sitting and doing nothing.
And she was crying.
Claude paused in astonishment.
Crying, he said.
The mater crying.
Yes.
She clearly did not wish me to see it, and so I pretended not to. I had thought she wasn't well before now. We must do something, Claude, make her see a doctor. But why hasn't she been to see a doctor all these days?
He asked.
The governor goes to a doctor if his nails want cutting. I don't know why she hasn't been. There might be several reasons. But I thought I would speak to you first, and then if you approved I would go to her and try to find out what is the matter.
I wish you would, he said.
Dora got up, but her mind went back to that which she had been brooding over in his absence, that which frightened her.
Did you see Jim? She asked.
Yes, he came in when I was there.
How was he?
She asked negligently.
Oh, much as usual.
I couldn't stop because I wanted to get back to you. Will you come and tell me about the mater, after you have seen her? Dora went back to Lady Osborne's room, and knocked before she entered. The apparition of her sitting and crying all alone had frightened her more than she had let Claude see, for as a rule her mother-in-law's cheerfulness was of a quality that seemed to be proof against all the minor accidents of life, and Dora remembered how, one day in Italy, when they had missed a train at Padua, and had to wait 3 hours, Lady Osborne's only comment had been, "Well, now, that will give us time to look about us." She was afraid, therefore, that the cause of her tears was not trivial. And now, when she went in again, receiving a rather indistinct answer to her knock, she found Lady Osborne hastily snatching up the day's paper, so as to pretend to be occupied. But her face wore an expression extraordinarily contorted, as if her habitual geniality found it a hard task to struggle to the surface. "And I'm sure the paper gets more and more interesting every day," said she, "though it's seldom I find time to have a glance at all the curious things that are going on in the world. What a dreadful place Morocco must be. I couldn't sleep quiet in my bed if I was there. What is it, my dear?" On her face and in her voice the trace of tears bravely suppressed still lingered, and a great wave of pity suddenly swept over Dora. Something was wrong, something which at present Lady Osborne was bearing in secret, for it was quite clear that her husband, whose cheerfulness at breakfast had bordered on the boisterous, knew nothing, nor did Claude know. Her mother-in-law, as Dora was well aware, was not a woman of complicated or subtle emotion, who could grieve over an imagined sorrow, or could admit to a personal relation with herself the woe of the world, for with more practical wisdom she gave subscriptions to those whose task it was to alleviate any particular branch of it. Her family, her hospitalities, her comfortable though busy life had been sufficient up till now to minister to her happiness, and if something disturbed that, Dora rightly thought that it must be something tangible and personal. So she went to the sofa, and sat down by her, and did not seek to be subtle.
"What is it?" she said. "Is there anything the matter?"
The simplicity was not calculated. It was perfectly natural, and had its effect. Lady Osborne held the paper in front of her a moment longer, but it was shaken with the trembling of her hands.
Then she dropped it.
"My dear, I am a selfish old woman," she said, "but I can't bear it any longer. I've not been well this long time, but I've tried to tell myself it was my imagination, and not bother anybody. And I could have held on, my dear, a little longer, if you hadn't come to me like this. I warrant you, there would have been plenty of laughing and chaff at Grota this weekend, as always. But the pain this morning was so bad that I just thought I would have a bit of a cry all to myself." "But why have you told nobody?" said Dora. "Not Claude, nor Dad, nor me." Lady Osborne mopped her eyes. "Bless your heart, haven't we all got things to bear, and best not to trouble others," she said. "I know well enough how you'd all spend your time in looking after me, and having the doctor and what not, and I thought I could get through to the end of the season and then go and rest, and see what was the matter. And, my dearie, I'm a dreadful coward, you know, and I couldn't bear the thought of being pulled about by the doctor, and maybe worse than that. Anyhow, I've not given in at once. Some days my color has been awful and no appetite, but I've kept my spirits up before you all. And I can't bear to think now that I must give in, and have to take doctor's stuff, and lie up, spoiling all your pleasure. But I don't think as I can go on much longer like this. Perhaps it's best that you know. Poor Eddie. Him and his jokes this morning at breakfast, chaffing me about Sir Thomas. Law, my dear, what spirits he has. I declare he quite took my thoughts off. And about Claude and Lizzie too, as if Claude ever gave a thought to anyone but yourself. Lady Osborne patted Dora's hand a moment in silence. She was not sure that Dora had relished her husband's fun at breakfast. Now was the time to set it right. But then, Eddie knew that, else he'd never have made a joke of it, she said. And you, my dearie, have been so sweet to me these weeks, not that you haven't been that always, as if you was my own daughter. Indeed, not that I complain of Lizzie, for I don't, often and often she's behaved high to Mr. O and me, when you, who have excuse enough, have never done such a thing. Often I've said to him, it's as if Dora was an Osborne herself. Thank you, my dearie, for that, and for all you've done and been. I dare say it's been difficult for you at times, but there. I dare say you think I've not noticed, but I have, my dear, and you've behaved beautiful always. I wanted just to say that, and you're behaving sweet and kind to me still. Somehow, deep down, this cut Dora like a knife. There was a wounding pathos about it, that made those efforts she had put forth to behave decently, appear infinitely trivial, humiliatingly cheap. And the gentle patting on her hand continued. And now, dearie, I'm going to ask you to do another thing yet, said Lady Osborne, and that is to take my place down at Grota this Sunday, and let me stay up here and see my doctor this afternoon. If you hadn't such quick and loving eyes, I should have gone through with it and held on, my dear, even if there was more mornings like this in store. But with you knowing, my dear, I'll not wait longer, and maybe make matters worse, though perhaps it's me as has been making a fuss about nothing, and a bottle of medicine will make me as fit as a flea again, as Mr. O used to say. Now we must put our heads together and contrive, so that he may think it's just a touch of the liver and nothing to be alarmed for, else he'll never go and leave me. He's gone off already to some committee, and the car is to call for him at 12 and drive him straight down, so that he'll find himself at Grota before he knows anything is wrong. And then, my dear, you must do your best to make him think it's nothing, as, please God, it isn't. What a trouble our insides are, though, to be sure, mine's given me little enough to complain of all these years. I've always eaten my dinner and got a good night's rest until this began. They talked long, contriving, as Lady Osborne had said, the sole point of the contrivance being that her husband should enjoy his day or two at Grota, and have everything to his liking, and not fret about her. Once and again once, Dora tried to lead the conversation back to Lady Osborne herself, to get from her some inkling of what her indisposition might be, what its symptoms were, with a view of encouraging her to face the doctor with equanimity, for this was clearly an ordeal she dreaded. And on Dora's third attempt she put an end to further questions. I think, dearie, we'll not talk about that, she said, because, as I told you, I'm such a coward as never was, and the more I think about it, the more coward I shall be when I get to the doctor's door. It was just the same with me about my teeth before I lost them all. If one had to come out, I had such a shrinking from a bit of pain, that if I thought about it, I knew I shouldn't go to the dentist at all. So I used to busy myself with other things, and plan a treat, maybe, for the working folk, or an extra good dinner for Mr. O, or a surprise for Per or Claude, and it's a similar to that what I'll do now, if you don't mind. And I assure you I'm so bothered over the thought of you and Dad being at Grota without me that I've little desire to think about anything else. 35 years it is last May, my dear, since we took each other for better or worse, and it's always been better, and not a night since then, I assure you, have we not slept under the same roof, and in the same room save when I had a cold and feared to give it him. And he's got to depend on me, gold bless him, and knows that I shall see he has a biscuit or two on a plate by his bedside and a glass of milk, against he wakes the night. Servants are never to be trusted, my dear, though I'm sure it's a shame to say it, when ours are so attentive. But he's got a new valet just of late, and if you could peep in at my lord's bedroom door when you went up to bed, and see as all was prepared, and that his slippers was put where he can see them in his dressing room, else he'll walk to bed in his bare feet and step on a pin or a tack some day, which I always dread for him. And if he comes in hot, as is taken to do in this weather from his walk, just you behave as if you was me, and say to him, Mr. O, you go and change your vest and your socks, else I don't pour out your cup of tea, and knowing as you'll do that will take a load off my mind, and I shall go to the doctor this afternoon, knowing as you are looking after him as if I was there, as comfortable as if I was going to have a cheque cashed for me. And, my dear, if you'd sit next him in church, and just nudge him if he attempts to follow the lesson without putting his glasses on. It's small print in his Bible, and never another one will he let me give him, just because it was that one he used to read out of to me when we were in Cornwall on our wedding trip, and sometimes no church within distance. But be sure he changes his underwear, my dear, when he comes in, for he catches cold easy, and his skin acts so well that it's as if he'd had a bath. And give him plenty of milk in his coffee at breakfast, not that he likes it, but he will have the coffee made so strong that it's enough to rasp the coats of the stomach, as they say, unless you drown it in milk. And you'll cheer him up, I know, my dear, if he gets anxious, and just say to him stuff and nonsense. Dad, Mrs. O's had a bit of an upset, same as you have times without number, and she's always nervous about herself, and has gone to see the doctor, and as like as not will come down tomorrow afternoon with a couple of pills in her pocket, and ready to be laughed at to your heart's content. That's what I want you to say, my dear, though you'll put it in your own words, and much better I'm sure. But today it's as if I feel I couldn't go and look after my friends, now that I know you'll take my place, for when there's a multitude in the house, sometimes the mistress can't get to bed till it maybe is 1 o'clock or worse, and I want a good long night. I shall try to see Sir Henry as soon as may be, and after that I don't doubt I shall just get to bed and sleep the clock round. I'm so tired, my dear, and there's something, well, I make no doubt that before many hours are out, we shall all be laughing together over my silliness, and Mr. O will be asking if I have taken enough phosphorus jelly, or what not. Law, he'll never let me hear the last of it. That was a triumphant conclusion. The whole speech punctuated by silences, punctuated by a little dropping of tears and by a little laughter, was hardly less triumphant. Once, ages ago, so it seemed to Dora, Claude had held up his father and mother as examples of the ideal antidote against the grey business of middle age, and it had failed to satisfy her then. She would have thought it comical, had not there been some very keen sense of disappointment about it, that a lover should speak to his beloved in such language. But now, with rekindled meaning, she remembered the incident and its setting. She had asked him for consolation with regard to the grey business that awaited everybody, hoping to hear words of glowing romance, and had found it half comical, half tragic, that he refuted her doubts by the visible example of his father and mother. He had said that she was his best girl still. But now Dora did not feel either the comedy or the tragedy of his reply, she felt only the truth of it. And she did not wonder that her mother-in-law was Dad's best girl still. But for herself, though there was heartache in much that had been said, there was the beginning of understanding also, or, at any rate, the awakening of the sense that there was something to understand. Lady Osborne had called herself a coward, and reiterated that charge, with regard to seeing a doctor only. But love, a golden barrier of solid defence, no filigree work, had come between her and her fear, yet it was scarcely true to say that it had come there, it was always there. Once Dora had thought that, compared to romance, any relation that could exist between Claude's parents must necessarily be of an ash-cold quality. But was it? She herself had known the romantic, but in comparison with all that she had been conscious of with regard to Claude for the last few weeks, she could not call Lady Osborne ash-cold. In her there was some glow, some authentic fire that had never known quenching. It might have altered in superficials, for flames there might have been substituted the glowing heart of the fire. But it was the same fire. There had not been ashes at any time. The fire always burned, unconsumed, with no waste of cinder. It was immortal, radium-like. Then for the first time the beauty of it struck her. Before this moment she had seen something that appeared comical. Then, with better vision, she had seen something that struck her as pathetic. Now with true vision she saw all she had missed before, beauty. It was that she had worshipped all her life, thinking that she would always recognize and adore. But she had missed it altogether in that which was so constantly under her eyes. She had been too quick in seeing all that was obvious: wealth, indiscriminate hospitality, vulgarity, since she had chosen to call it so. But the big thing, that which was the essential, she had missed altogether. Once before, when Mr. and Mrs. Osborne shared a hymn book in church, she had seen, and thought she understood. Now she was beginning to understand. She began to want to take other hearts into her own. The desire was there. The beauty she had at last seen attracted her, drew her to it. Strangely had it been unveiled, by tale of slippers and biscuits and underwear. She never had expected to find it in such garb. But Claude had known it was there. He had not been diverted by superficial things, but had seen always that the mater was the governor's best girl still. Dora left her mother-in-law that morning with a sense of humility, a sense also of disgust at herself for her own stupidity. All these months a thing as beautiful as this great love and tenderness had been in front of her eyes, and she had not troubled to look at it with enough attention to recognize that there was beauty there. But now the tears that dimmed her own eyes quickened her vision. At last she saw the picture in its true value, and it made her ashamed. Was she equally blind, too, with regard to Claude? Was there something in him, some great thing which mattered so much that all which for months had got on her nerves more and more every day was, if seen truly, as trivial as she now saw were those things that had blinded her in the case of Lady Osborne? It might be so. All she knew was that if it was there, she had not troubled to look for it. At first she had so loved his beauty that nothing else mattered, nor did it seem to her possible that love could ever be diminished or suffer eclipse. But that had happened, even before she had borne a child to him, and to take its place, and more than take its place, there had sprung up no herbs of more fragrant beauty than the scarlet of that first flower. She had nothing in her garden for him but herbs of bitterness and resentment. That, at least, was all she knew of till now. She paused a moment outside the door of the sitting-room where she had left him, before entering, for she knew his devotion to his mother, and was sorry for him. And somehow she felt herself unable to believe that Lady Osborne's optimistic forecast would be justified. She did not think that in a few hours they would be all laughing over her imaginary ailment. And Claude must see that she was anxious. It would be better to confess to that, and prepare him for the possibility of there being something serious in store. He looked up quickly as she came in, throwing away the cigarette he had only just begun. "Well," he said. Dora heard the tremble and trouble in that one word, and she was sorry for him. That particular emotion she had never felt for him before. She had never seen him except compassed about with serene prosperity. "Claude, I'm afraid she is ill," she said. "She feels it herself too. She has been in great pain." "But how long has it been going on?" he asked. "Why hasn't she seen a doctor?" "Because she didn't want to spoil things for us. She thought she could hold on. But she is going now, today." "What does she think it is?" asked he. "She wouldn't talk of it at all," said Dora. "I think she could hardly think of it, because she was thinking of Dad so much. She won't come down to Grota, you see, but stop up here, unless she is told it is nothing. And so we must do our best that he shan't be anxious or unhappy until we know whether there is real cause or not. She wants me particularly to go down there, or of course I would stop with her." "The mater must feel pretty bad if she's not coming to Grota," said he. "Yes, I am afraid she does. Oh, Claude, I am so sorry for her, and you all. Her bravery has made us all blind.
I ought to have seen long ago. I reproach myself bitterly. No, no, there's no cause for that, said he gently. She's taken us all in, and it's just like her. Besides, who knows? It may be nothing in the least serious. I know that, said she, and we won't be anxious before we have cause. Go and see her, dear, before we start, and make very light of it. Just say you are glad she is being sensible at last, in going to be put right. There is no cause for anxiety yet. I shall go round to Sir Henry's and arrange an appointment for her this afternoon, if possible, and get him to write to us very fully this evening, so that we shall know tomorrow. And then, if we are to get down by lunch, it will be time for us to start. I ordered the motor for 12. Lord Osborne was a good deal perturbed at the NE with which Dora met him at Grota, and it was an affair that demanded careful handling to induce him not to go back at once to town and see her. Bless me! Maria not well enough to come down, and you expect me to take my Sunday off, and eat my dinner as if my old lady was seated opposite me? He asked. Not I, my dear. Maria's and my place is together, wherever that place may be. But you can't go against her wish, Dad, said Dora. And what's to become of me if you do? I've been sent down on purpose to play at being her. You've got to have a glass of milk by your bed, and a couple of biscuits. Oh, I know all about it. To think of your knowing that, he said, rather struck by this detail. Yes, but only this morning did I know it, said Dora. I sat with her a long time, and all she could think about was that you should be comfortable down here. Well, it goes against the grain not to be with her, said he. But, as you say, there's no cause to be alarmed yet. And Sir Henry's going to see her this afternoon. Yes, and telegraph to me afterward. Dad, if you upset all our beautiful arrangements, neither she nor I will ever speak to you again. Oh, do be good. But it won't be like home not to have Lady O here, said he. She knows that, but Claude and I have to make as good an imitation as we can. And you'll put me in a dreadful hole if you go back to town. She will say I have made no hand of looking after you at all. I shall be in disgrace, as well as you. Well, God bless you, my dear, said he, and thank you for being so good to us. Here I'll stop, if it's the missus's wish. No, I don't fancy any pudding today, thank you. Dora laid down her spoon and fork. Dad, not one morsel do I eat unless you have some, she said. And I'm dreadfully hungry. Lord Osborne laughed within himself. You've got a managing wife, Claude, he said. She twists us all round her little finger. The expected telegram arrived in the course of the evening, and though it contained nothing definite, Lord Osborne was able to interpret it in the most optimistic manner. Well, Sir Henry tells you that Mrs. O.S. in no pain, and that is going to see her again tomorrow, he said. Why, I call that good news, and it relieves my mind, my dear. Bless her, she'll get a good night's rest, I hope now, and feel a different creature in the morning. There's nothing else occurs to you, my dear? Surely he would have said if he had found anything really wrong. Dora read the telegram again. No, I think you are quite right to put that interpretation on it, she said truthfully enough. We'll hope to get good news again tomorrow. I am glad she is out of pain. But secretly she feared something she did not say, namely, that there was something wrong, but that Sir Henry had not been able without further examination to say what it was. Yet, after all, that interpretation might be only imagination on her part. But there was nothing in the telegram which appeared to her to be meant to allay the anxiety which he must know existed. Dora went to bed that evening with a great many things to think about, which had to be faced, not shirked or put aside. The day, which by the measure of events had been almost without incident, seemed terribly full of meaning to her. Lady Osborne had seen a doctor,
She had talked over domestic affairs with Dora. That was not quite all. Claude had thought that a check had been forged, but found on examination that he had made a mistake. Set out like that, there seemed little here that could occupy her thoughts at all, still less that could keep away from her the sleep that in general was so punctual a visitor to her. But tonight it did not come near her, and she did not even try to woo its approach. She had no thought of sleep, though she was glad to have the darkness and the silence round her so that she might think without distraction. All these things, trivial as events, seemed to her to be significant, to hold possibilities, potentialities, altogether disproportionate to their face value. It might prove not to be so when she examined them. It might be that for some reason a kind of nightmare inflation was going on in her mind, so that, as in physical nightmare things swell to gigantic shape, in her imagination these simple little things were puffed to grotesque and terrifying magnitude. She had to think them over calmly and carefully. It might easily be that they would sink to normal size again. She took first that affair of the check, which had turned out, apparently, to be no affair at all. Claude had made a mistake, so he had himself said, and the check which he and the bank had suspected was perfectly genuine. But Dora, between the time of his thinking there was something wrong and of his ascertaining that there was not, had passed a very terrible quarter of an hour, one that it made her feel sick to think of even now. There was no use in blinking it. She had feared that Jim had forged her husband's check. She had hardly given a thought to what the consequences might be. What turned her white and cold was the thought that he had done it. Her pen had spluttered when the thought first occurred to her, but she believed Claude had not noticed that. But had he noticed the sob of relief in her voice when he told her that the check was all right? He was not slow to observe. His perceptions, especially where she was concerned, were remarkably vivid, and it seemed to her that he must have noticed it. Yet he had said nothing. Anyhow, the check was correct, and she was left with the fact that it had seemed to her possible that Jim had been guilty of this gross meanness. And, just as if the thing had been true, she found herself trying to excuse him, saw herself pleading with Claude for him. Poor Jim was not quite like other people. He did not seem to know right from wrong. He had always cheated at games. She remembered telling Claude so one day down here at Grota, when he and Jim had been playing croquet and Jim had cheated. But they had not been playing for money. So Claude had told her. And he had told her the check was all right. That was all. There was nothing more to be thought of with regard to this. Yet she still lingered on the threshold of the thought of it. Jim had got cleaned out, his own phrase, in the Derby week, had pledged the quarter's rent of Grota in advance to pay his Derby debts. And somebody had told her that Jim had lost heavily at Newmarket afterward, and he had told her that he had paid and was upright before the world in the matter of debts of honor. She had passed the threshold of that thought and was inside again. Where had he got the money from? Well, anyhow, not by forgery. Claude had said that the mistake was his. But how odd that he should not have been able to recollect about a check for £500, drawn only 10 days before. Dora still lingered in the precincts of that thought, though she beckoned, so to speak, another thought to distract her. What a wonderful thing! How triumphant and beautiful was the love of which she had seen a glimpse today! It was all the more wonderful because it seemed to be common, to be concerned with biscuits and coffee. 100 times she had seen Lady Osborne wrapped up in such infinitesimal cares as these, and had thought only that her mind and her soul were altogether concerned with serving, that the provision for the comfortable house and the good dinner was aspiration sufficient for her spiritual capacity. Yet there had always been a little more than that. There had been the moment in church when the sermon was to her taste, and the hymn a favorite, and she and her husband had tunelessly sung out of one book. That had touched Dora a little, but she had then dismissed it as a banal affair of goody-goody combined with a melodious tune, when she saw the great lunch that they both ate immediately afterward. But now these details, these Martha cares had taken a different value. This morning Lady Osborne had been in great pain, had broken down in her endeavour to carry on somehow, and was face to face with a medical interview which she dreaded. But still she could think with meticulous care of her husband's milk, of his slippers, of his tendency towards strong coffee. What if below the Martha was Mary? If it was Mary's love that made Martha so sedulous in serving? All that she had overlooked, not caring to see below a surface which she said was commonplace and prosperous. The surface was transparent enough, too, it was not opaque. She could have seen down into the depths at any time if she had taken the trouble to look. Before her marriage and for a few months after it, she had thought she knew what depths meant. She thought she knew what it was to be absorbed in another. Then had come her disillusionment. She had worshipped surface only, she knew no more of Claude than that. She had loved his beauty, she had got accustomed to it. She had at first disregarded what she had grown to call his vulgarity, and had not got accustomed to it. She had known he was honest and true and safe, but she had grown to take all that for granted. She had never studied him, looked for what was himself, she had had few glimpses of him, no more than she had had of his mother. But today she felt that with regard to her these glimpses were fused together, they made a view, a prospect of a very beautiful country. But as yet there had no fusing like that come with regard to her husband. Now that she saw, even the country of the grey business was beautiful. And at present in her own warm country, her young country, beauty was lacking. Perhaps, here the third subject came in, perhaps even in the trouble that she felt threatened them, there were elements that might be alchemized. She was willing, at least, to attempt to find gold, to transform what she had thought was common into the fine metal. Some alchemy of the sort had already taken place before her eyes. She no longer thought common those little pathetic anxieties which she had heard this morning. 4 days and months the same anxieties, the same care had been manifest. There was no day, no hour in which Lady Osborne had not been concerned with the material comfort of those whom she loved. She was always wondering if her husband had got his lunch at the house, and what they gave him, whether the motor had got there in time, and if he remembered to put his coat on. Nor had her care embraced him alone. One day she had come up to Dora's sitting room and found that there was a draught round the door, and so had changed her seat. But next day there was a screen placed correctly. Or Claude had sneezed at dinner, and a mysterious file had appeared on his dressing table with the legend that directed its administration. He had come in to Dora to ask if she had any explanation of the bottle. But she had none, and they concluded Mrs. Osborne had put it there, fussily no doubt, for a sneeze was only a sneeze, but with what loving intent. She remembered everything of that sort. Per liked kidneys, his wife liked cocoa. It was all attended to. Martha was in evidence. But Mary was there. Dora's thoughts had strayed again. She had meant to think about the trouble that she felt was threatening, and to see if by some alchemy it might be transformed into a healing of hurt. She did not believe that she was fanciful in expecting bad news. She wished to contemplate the effect of it, if it came. Supposing Lady Osborne was found to be suffering from something serious, how was she herself to behave? She had to make things easier for her father-in-law, she had to be of some use. That was not so difficult, a little affection meant so much to him. He glowed with pleasure when she was kind. But for Claude? That was more difficult. She had to be all to him. It was much harder there to meet the needs she ought to meet, and should instinctively meet without thought. Once, if she had said, "Oh, Claude," all would have been said because the simple words were a symbol. But now she could not say, "Oh, Claude," like that. She could be Martha, that was easy. But it was not Martha who was wanted. The door from his dressing room opened, and he came in, shielding with his hand the light of his candle, so that it should not fall on her face. The outline of his fingers, even to her half-shut eyes, was drawn in luminous red, where the light shone through the flesh. He had often come in like that, fearing to awaken her. Often she had been awake, as she was now. Tonight she feigned sleep. And she heard the soft breath that quenched the candle. She heard a whisper of voice close to her, words of one who thought that none heard. "Good night, my darling," he said. Chapter 11. Jim had been engaged to spend this weekend with a party, of which it is sufficient to say that though it would probably be amusing, it would not appear in the columns of the Morning Post. But on the Saturday afternoon he sent an excuse and remained in town instead. Much as he hated solitude, he had got something to do which made solitude a necessary evil. He had got to sit down and think, and continue thinking till he had made up his mind. He had to adopt a certain course of action, or by not acting at all commit himself to another course. Claude had not come back into the room after sending that message by the telephone, and calling to him the farewell he had been unable to answer. A few seconds before only, when he himself had come into the room and found Claude examining the counterfoils of his checkbook, he had thought that all was over, and had Claude said nothing to him, just looked at him, and pointed with a finger to the blank counterfoil close to the end of the book, Jim would have confessed. But Claude had spoken at once those incredible words, and the moment after had confirmed the reality of them by the message to his bank. The immensity of that relief had taken away Jim's power of speech. Had he tried to use his voice he must have screamed. Then he heard the door of the flat shut, and the next moment he was rolling on the sofa, his face buried in its cushions, to stifle his hysterical laughter. The incredible had happened. The impossible was now part of the sober history of the month. The bank had called in question the check. Evidently Claude had come down here to see whether he had drawn a check of corresponding date, had found a blank counterfoil, not the first in the book, and had accepted that as evidence that the check was of his own drawing. The possibility of a forgery never apparently occurred to him. His vaunted carelessness about money matters was strikingly exemplified. He had not exaggerated it in the least. What a blessed decree of Providence that one's brother-in-law shall be so rich and such an idiot. Jim felt almost satisfied with the world. But next moment, with the same suddenness as this spasm of relief had come, it ceased. Swift and huge as the genie of some Arabian tale, a doubt arose. And before it fully developed itself, it was a doubt no longer, but a certainty. For one moment his relief had tricked him into believing that Claude thought the check to be of his own drawing. The next, Jim could no more delude himself with that. Rich as Claude was, fool as he was, it was not possible that he should believe himself to have drawn £500 in cash but a week ago, and today find no trace of it, nor any possible memory of how he had spent it. No, the check had been called in question. Claude therefore must know that forgery had been committed. That was certain. But he had told his bankers that the check was genuine. Jim got up from the sofa, put the cushion in its place, and smoothed it with mechanical precision. What did this mean? Did he guess by whom the forgery was committed? In a moment Jim felt injured and indignant at the idea of such a possibility crossing Claude's mind. He had never given him the shadow of ground for thinking that such a thing as forgery was possible to him. It was an insult of the grossest kind, if such a notion had ever presented itself to him. But Claude was of a suspicious nature. Once before, Jim remembered, Dora had talked some nonsense about Jim's having cheated at croquet, and Claude had said that he was satisfied that this was not the case, when Jim told him it was not. He won a sovereign over that silly game of croquet. But it was monstrous, if true, that Claude should suspect him of this. It was impossible for any self-respecting person, however unworthy of self-respect, to stop in his rooms, accept his hospitality, until he had made sure that such an idea had never crossed Claude's mind. His sense of injury bordered upon the virtuous. And then, with disconcerting rapidity, sense of injury and virtue all vanished. He could not keep it up. He saw through himself. Once more his mind went back to the rapturous possibility that had caused him to bury his face in the sofa cushion. Was there any chance of Claude's believing that the check was genuine? But already the question did not need an answer. That possibility was out of sight, below the horizon, and he was here alone, swimming, drowning. That Claude knew forgery had been committed was certain then, and for some reason he shielded the forger. Either he suspected Jim, the sense of injury and virtue did not make themselves felt now, or he did not. If he did not, good.
If he did, well, good also, since he shielded him. Quick-witted and mentally nimble as he was, Jim took a little while to realize that situation. In the normal course of life he would necessarily meet Claude often, and he could not see himself doing so. He could not see how social intercourse was any more possible. Or would Claude avoid such intercourse, manage somehow that they should not meet? That might be managed for a time, but not permanently. Dora would ask him to dine, or Lady Osborne would ask him to stay, and either he or Claude would always have to frame excuses. Yet Claude's words of farewell to him had been quite normal and cordial. There was nothing there that anticipated unpleasantness or estrangement in the future. Perhaps Claude harbored no suspicion against him. Then whom did he shield? There was only one person, himself, who could have done this, whom there could be sufficient motive for shielding. And then suddenly his own dislike of his brother-in-law flared up into hatred, the hatred of the injurer for the injured, which is one of the few things in this world that are pure black, and have no ray of reflection of anything good, however inverted and distorted, in them. And he was living in the rooms, eating the food, drinking the wine of the man whom he hated. That Claude had loaded him with benefits made, as once before, his offence the greater. And he was in Claude's power. At any moment, even if he did not suspect Jim now of having done this, he had but to send a further message to the bank, saying that their suspicion was correct, and he had not drawn the check, and he would suspect no further, for he would know. The hot hours of the sunny afternoon went by, not slowly at all, but with unusual speed, though he passed them doing nothing, but occasionally walking up and down the room. He had told Parker when he sent his telegram of excuse about the river party that he would dine at home and alone, and it was a matter for surprise when he was told that dinner was ready. And after dinner he sat again in the room where this morning he had found Claude with his checkbook, as far from his decision as ever. But about one thing he had made up his mind. He believed Claude knew, or at any rate, suspected who had done this. There was no other explanation that could account at all reasonably for his shielding the culprit. It was no time to invent utopian explanations, and even they would be elusive to the seeker. Jim wanted to see the things that were actually the case on this evening. What was to be done? What was to be done? He could not tell Claude that his suspicions were grossly and gratuitously insulting, for Claude had expressed none. He had said there was nothing to suspect, no ground for suspicion. Nor did Jim see that it was possible to continue seeing Claude, feeling that he was in his hands, that at any moment he might disown the check, and let the bank pursue the usual course. Claude had been generous, quixotically generous that morning. But who knew whether that might not only be a momentary impulse, or even a move merely to gain time, to consider. It was a serious step to let one's wife's brother be prosecuted. But very likely he had only done it to stay immediate proceedings. Very likely he wanted to talk it over with Dora first. And at that thought the breaking point came. Through these solitary hours Jim had faced a good deal, and the fibers of endurance were weakened. And he could not face that. Anything was more tolerable than the picture of Dora being told. Generous. That word had occurred in his thoughts, and it had been applied by him to Claude. It was no less than his due. He had always been generous. His generosity had not cost him much, had not entailed self-denial, but it had been there, it had been given. First in very little ways, as when he gave Jim free living at the flat. Then in larger ways, when for the sake of Dora he imputed mere carelessness to himself instead of letting crime be brought home to another. The price of his generosity concerned nobody. And Jim was beaten. The worst of him surrendered to something a little better than the worst. The surrender was not nobly made. It was made from necessity, because every other course was a little more impossible than that. Claude had to be told. He knew that he was in Claude's hands already. The most he could do and the least was to seem to put himself there. And then suddenly he felt so tired that thought was no longer possible, and he fell asleep where he sat a day. It was deep in the night when he woke, for the noise of traffic had almost sunk to silence, but from the dreamlessness of exhausted sleep he passed straight into full consciousness again,
and took up the tragic train of thought where he had left it. He did not reconsider his decision, it was cut in steel, nor did he desire to, for to wish for the impossible requires the strong spring of hope, and of hope he had none. He was beaten, he resigned. And then on the outer darkness there shone a little ray. Claude, whom a few hours ago he had hated with the rancor of the injurer, had been generous, appallingly generous. Was there nothing he could do for Claude? Yes, one thing, the hardest of all, the utmost. For weeks he knew things had not gone well with him and Dora. He got on her nerves, his vulgarities, as was most natural, irritated her, and she could no longer see in him anything but them. But there was more in Claude than that. She did not know it, but he might tell her. Perhaps if she knew, she would see, would understand. Or had Claude already told her? That had seemed possible before, a thing easily pictured. But he did not think it likely now. It was not consistent with what Claude had already done. For it must have been for his wife's sake that he had acted thus. A little while before it had seemed to Jim the worst possible thing, the one unbearable thing, that Dora should know. But looked at from this new standpoint it was different. If Claude told her, it was one thing, it was another if he did. If he did, if he could, it might help Dora to see that there was something in Claude beyond his commonness. And, Jim was a long time coming to it, it might in some degree atone, not in Claude's eyes, for he would not tell Claude what he meant to do, but in those eyes which look on all evil things and all good things, and see the difference between them. There were a few arrangements to be made on Sunday, but he made them without flinching. Claude and Dora were at Grota, and a line to Claude there, asking to see him as soon as possible on Monday, and a line to Dora at Park Lane, saying that he wanted to see her alone in the afternoon, was all that was necessary. It was better to take those interviews in that order. He could not help being clever over it, for it was easier to face Dora when able to tell her that he had already confessed to Claude. What he had to say would come with more force thus. She would see that for the sake of helping Claude and her, he had done something that could not have been easy. All that day down at Grota they waited for news from Sir Henry, but none came. Lord Osborne, always optimistic, saw the most hopeful significance in his silence. "Depend upon it, my dear," he said to Dora as she went to bed that night. "Depend upon it Sir Henry has seen my lady again, and has quite forgotten that we might be in some anxiety, because, as he knows now, forgetting he ain't told us, there's naught to be anxious about. That's like those busy men, Lord, my dear. Fancy passing your life in other people's insides, so to speak, why it would make you forget your own name. But if there had been any cause for us to worry, depend upon it he'd have let us know. I bet I shall be making a joke of my lady's ailments before I'm 24 hours older. I'll be getting a few ready for her as I do my undressing tonight. And it's me as is cheering you up, my dear, this moment. You go to sleep quiet, or else I'll tell Mrs. O that you've given me such an uncomfortable Sunday as I've not had since first we was married." Then came Monday morning. Dora had her early post brought up to her bedroom, but since she had received Saturday posts forwarded from town yesterday, there was nothing sent on. In fact, there was only one letter for her directed to her here, and she opened it and read it. Claude had already left by an early train when she got down. She did not expect this, since, as far as she knew, he had no engagements that morning and had intended not to leave till a later train, but he had gone. Lord Osborne and she were going to lunch in the country and drive back afterward, but after breakfast, when the last guests had gone, she went to him. He was in the room he called the Liber Y and was reading the Morning Post. "See here, my dear," he said, "and think how we're all at the mercy of the press. There's my lady giving a little party this evening, and I'm blessed if they don't know all about it already. Listen here, Lady Osborne has a small party tonight to meet." "Ah, don't," said Dora, not meaning to speak, but knowing she had to. Instantly the paper fell to the ground. "What is it, my dear?" he said.
I have heard from Sir Henry, she said. She gave him a moment for that, then she went on. Dad, dear, she said, there is trouble. He saw her again yesterday, and has written to me about it. There is something wrong. He does not know for certain what it is, but they will have to find out. Oh, it is no use my hinting at it. You've got to know. Yes, my dear, yes, said he. They have got to operate. It may be very bad indeed. They can't tell yet. They don't know till they see. Dora drew a long breath. It may be cancer, she said, and by instinct she put her hand over her eyes, so that she should not see him. Mrs. O, he said very quietly. Dora heard the buzzing of honeyquesting bees in the flower border outside the window, the clicking of a mowing machine on the lawn, and from close beside her the slow breathing of Lord Osborne. Without looking at him, she knew that he had pursed up his lips, almost as if whistling, a habit of his in perplexed moments. He had been smoking a cigar when she came in, and she heard him lay this down on a tray by his elbow. And then he spoke. Well, my dear, he said, we've all got to help her bear it, whatever it is. Dora found it impossible to speak for a moment. She could have given him sympathy had there been anything in his words that suggested it was wanted. She could have told him that they must hope for the best, that the worst was by no means certain yet. There were 100 quite suitable things to say, if only he had appeared to need them in the least. But quite clearly, he did not. He did not happen to be thinking about himself at all or to want any consolation. And in face of this simplicity, she was dumb. It was perfect. There was nothing to be said except give the sign of assent. And, my dear, if you'll order the motor round at once, I'll put a few papers together, as I must take up with me, and then I think I'll be off. And what'll you do, my dear? Hadn't you better stop as planned and have your morning in the country? Not but what I should dearly like to have you by my side. Ah, Dad, said she, and kissed him. He smiled at her, holding her hand tight a moment. We've got to keep our pecker up, my dear, he said, so as to help her keep hers. She'll be brave enough when she sees we're brave. God bless her. And brave we are and will be, my dearie. We'd scorn to be cowards. And I'm glad we didn't know this till this morning, for she'll be pleased to hear as we had such a pleasant Sunday. Yes, she could think of nothing else when she talked to me on Saturday, said Dora. What little more there was to be told she told him on their way up, but otherwise their drive was rather silent. Once or twice he leaned out of the window and spoke to the chauffeur. You can get along a bit quicker here, he said. There's an empty road. Then he turned to Dora. If you don't mind going a bit above the average, my dear, he asked. 'Twould be a good thing, too, if we got home before Claude, and it's but a slow train he'll have caught. And once again as they crossed the great heathery upland of Ashdown Forest, redolent with gorse and basking in the sun, seems strange on a beautiful day like this, he said. But there! Who knows but that we shan't have some pleasant weather yet. Claude, meantime, getting Jim's letter by the same post that had brought his news to Dora, had left by an earlier train, in order to see Jim as soon as possible. He had gone before Dora came down, and thus heard nothing of Sir Henry's letter, and though he was anxious to know, as soon as he got to town, how his mother was, he determined to go to the flat on his way to Park Lane. That would not take long, whatever it might be that Jim wished to tell him. A few minutes, he imagined, would suffice. All the way up he pondered over it, but think as he might, he could find only one explanation of Jim's request, and that was that he was going to confess. That was the best thing that could happen, and as far as he could see it was the only thing. But the thought of his own part embarrassed him horribly. He had no liking for his brother-in-law, and guessed that on Jim's side there was a similar barrenness of affection. All this would make the interview difficult and painful. He could forgive him easily and willingly, but instinctively he felt how chilly a thing forgiveness is,
if there is no warmth of feeling behind to vitalize it. But when first he suspected that Jim had done this, he felt sorry for him. If it turned out that he was going to confess, his pity was certainly not diminished. On the threshold he paused. His repugnance for what lay before him was almost invincible, and all his pondering had led to nothing practical. He was still absolutely without idea as to what he should say himself. But the thing had to be done. Waiting made it no easier, and he went in. He would have to trust to the promptings of the moment. All he was sure of was that he did not feel unkind, but only sorry. So, had he known it, he need not have been so very uncomfortable. Jim was standing in the window, looking out onto the street. He turned as Claude came in, but said nothing. Something had to be done, and Claude spoke. "You asked me to come and see you," he said. "So I came up as early as I could. Oh, good morning, Jim." He looked up, and saw that Jim did not speak because he could not. His face was horribly white, and his lips were twitching. And at the sight of him, helpless, and, whatever he had done, suffering horribly, a far greater warmth of pity came over Claude than he had felt hitherto. All his kindness was challenged. And the prompting of the moment was not a mistaken one. "Oh, I say, old chap," he said, and stopped short. For Jim broke. During all those 2 hideous days he had nerved himself up to encounter abuse, disgust, any form of righteous wrath and contempt. He knew well that Claude had spared him not for his own sake, but for Dora's, and in this confession he was going to make, he was prepared to be treated as he deserved, though Claude had spared him public disgrace. But what he had not nerved himself up to encounter was kindness, such as that which rang in those few words. And once more, but now not with hysterical laughter, but with the weeping of exhaustion and shame and misery, he buried his head in that same sofa cushion. Claude felt helpless, awkward, brutal. But it was no use doing anything yet. There was no reaching Jim till that violence had abated, and he sat there waiting, just crossing over once to the door, and bolting it for fear Parker should come in. And at length he laid his hand on Jim's shoulder. "It's knocked you about awfully," he said. "I can see that. I'm awfully sorry. You must have had a hellish 2 days. You needn't tell me, you know." Jim pulled himself together, and raised his head. "That's just what I must do," he said. "I forged your check." "Well, well," said Claude. But Jim had got the thing said, and now he went on with suppressed and bitter vehemence. "I've always been a swindler, I think," he said. "I'm rotten, that's what the matter with me. I've cheated all my life. I can't even play games without cheating. I cheated you at croquet once, and won a sovereign. Dora saw." Again Claude's instinct, not his reason, prompted him, and not amiss. It only told him he was sorry for Jim, and could a little reassure him over this. "But she didn't know we were playing for money," said he quickly. "In fact, I told her we were not. So it's twice that you have spared me." "Her, rather," said Jim. Claude accepted the correction. It was an obvious one to him no less than to Jim. "Yes, she'd have been awfully cut up if she had known," he said simply. Jim got up. "I wonder if you can believe I'm sorry," he said. "I am. My God, I've touched bottom now." "Why, yes, of course I believe it," said Claude. "It's broken you up, I can see that. Fellows don't break unless they are sorry. But as for the thing itself, if you don't mind my saying it, I think all cheating is touching bottom. It's a rotten game. You know that now, though. And if you can believe me, I'm awfully sorry too. It's a wretched thing to happen. But I'm so glad you told me. It makes an awful difference, that." Jim was silent a moment. "I want to ask you something," he said at length. "When did you first suspect me? Was it when I came in and found you here on Saturday?" Claude bit his lip. He did not at all like answering this. "No, before that," he said. "At least I was afraid it was you as soon as I found I had left a checkbook here. I'm sorry, but as you ask me, there it is." "From your previous knowledge of me?" asked Jim quietly. "Well, yes, I suppose so, though you make me feel a brute. I say, I don't think it's any good going back on that, either for your sake or mine." "Yes it is, it hurts, that's why it's good." Claude shifted his place on the sofa a shade nearer Jim, and again laid his hand on his shoulder. "Well, I think you've been hurt enough for the present," he said. "I don't like seeing it. You've had as much as you can stand just now." Jim shook his head. "There's another thing, too," he said. "I'm absolutely cleaned out, and I can't repay you till next quarter." Claude considered this. It was perfectly cheap and easy to say that he need not think of paying at all, but his judgment gave him something better to say than that. "Well, we'll wait till then," he said. "I don't want to be unreasonable." Again Jim's lip quivered, and Claude, seeing that, rose to go. "Well, I must get back," he said. "I want to hear how the mater is. She hasn't been well, and Sir Henry Franks saw her on Saturday, and again yesterday. Look round after lunch, will you? I don't think Dora and the governor get back till then. And you'll come on to the musical show this evening? There'll be some good singing." "Right, oh." But still Jim could not speak, and there was silence again. Then Claude spoke quickly, finally. "Buck up, old chap," he said, and went straight to the door without looking back. He let himself out, and went for a turn up and down the street before going to Park Lane. He had been a good deal moved, for, kind-hearted to the core, it was dreadful to him to see, as he expressed it, a fellow so awfully down in his luck. And he was conscious of another thing that struck him as curious. He had liked Jim during those few minutes he had seen him today, a thing he had never done before, and he wished he could have made things easier for him, which again was a new sensation, for all that he had ever done for his brother-in-law he had done, frankly, for Dora's sake. But he could not see how to make this easier. It was no use telling him that cheating was a thing of no importance. It was no use telling him he need not pay back what he owed. That was not the way to make the best of this very bad job. Of course, Jim must feel miserable. It would be a thing to sicken at if he did not. Luckily, however, there was no doubting the sincerity of his wretchedness. And yet the boyish sort of advice implied by the buck-up was in place, too. But he felt vaguely that he could have done much better than he had done. In that, had he known it, he would have found that Jim disagreed with him. He was told to his surprise, by the servant who let him in, that Dora and his father had arrived a few minutes ago, and that Dora wished to see him as soon as he came in. Accordingly, he went straight to her room. "Oh, Claude," she said, "you have come. We didn't know where you were. I had no idea you had left Grota till I came down to breakfast." There was trouble in her voice, and he noticed it, wondering if by any chance it had something to do with the trouble he had seen already that day. But clearly it could not. "What is it?" he said quickly. "Your mother," she said, for it was no use attempting to break things. "Sir Henry saw her again yesterday. There has to be an operation. There is some growth. They can't tell what it is for certain until they operate. Dad is going to see her now. They have settled it is best for him to tell her. Of course he won't tell her what the fear is. Oh Claude, I am so sorry, it is so dreadful." "How does the governor take it?" asked Claude. "Exactly as you would expect." "But it will be awful for him telling her," said he. "I had much better. Poor I, anyhow. It'll tear his heart out." "He won't let you." When Sir Henry spoke of telling her, he said at once, "That's for me to do." And then he went away to have a few minutes alone before going to her. A tap came at the door. Lord Osborne always tapped before he entered Dora's room. It was her bit of a flat, he called it, and his tap was ringing the bell, and asking if she was in. "Well, Claude, my lad," he said, "Dora will have told you. We've all got to keep up a brave heart, for your mother's sake." Claude kissed his father, and somehow that went to Dora's heart. He had once said to her that kissing seemed pretty meaningless when she was not concerned. "Yes, Dad," said he. "That we will." "That's right, my boy. And that blessed girl of yours has been so good to me, such as never was, and if she'll give her dad a kiss, too, why there we are, and thank you, my dear. Now I'm going to see mother and tell her, and I dare say she'll like to see you both some time today, though if she doesn't, why you'll both understand, won't you? They've fixed it for tomorrow, if she's agreeable." "Dad, do let me do that for you," said Claude. "It's better for me to tell her." "No, my lad, that's for your father and no other," said he, "though it's like you to suggest it, and thank you, my boy. I'll come straight back to you, my dears, and tell you how all goes, and how she takes it, and pray try to quiet Mrs. Purr. She's carrying on so silly, wringing her hands and asking, 'Is she better? Is she better?' and telling me to bear up and all, as if I didn't know that, small thanks to her. Per takes her back to Sheffield this afternoon, thank the Lord, and may I be pardoned for that speech, but it's how I feel with her ridiculous ways." He went straight to his wife's room, and was admitted by the nurse. Lady Osborne was in bed, of course, but smiled to him with neither more nor less than her usual cheerfulness. "Well, and there's my Eddie," she said. "And I hope you've had a pleasant Sunday, my dear, as I'm sure you must have, with such pleasant company as came down to see you. I tell you I'm feeling a regular fraud this morning, for what with lying in bed and the medicine Sir Henry gave me, which took the pain away beautiful, I feel ever so much better. Now sit you down, Mr. O, and have a chat. Are you comfortable in that chair, my dear?" "That I am, specially since I know you're feeling easier and more like yourself, mother," he said. "And before long, please God, we'll have you looking after us all again." His wife was silent a moment. Then she spoke. "Eddie, my dear," she said, "Sir Henry said as how you would come and have a talk with me, for he's told me naught himself, but just said, 'You lie still and don't worry, Mrs. Osborne, for he forgets as how you've been honoured.' And I've guessed, my dear, that he means you've to tell me what's the matter with me, and what they're going to do to me. My dear, I'll lie here a year, and take all the medicine they choose, if only." He moved his chair a little nearer the bed, the tears stood in his eyes, but his mouth was firm. "I've come to tell you, my dear," he said, "and we can't always be choosers to have things the way we wish. We've got to submit to the will of God, and when them as are wise doctors, like Sir Henry, tells us it's got to be this, or it's got to be that, it's his will, my dear, no less than the doctor's word. He's sent us a sight of joy and happiness, and today, Maria, he's sending us a bit of trouble, for a change, I may say. But we'll take it thankful, old lady, same as we've taken all them beautiful years that we've had together. My dear, if I could get into bed there instead of you, and go through it for you. But that's not to be. I'll tell you as quick as I can, my dear, for there's no use in being silly and delaying, but—" He blew his nose violently, then left his chair, and knelt down by the bed, taking her hand in his. And he kissed it. "They don't quite know what's wrong with you, dearie," he said, "and they've got to see. You won't feel nothing, they'll give you a whiff of chloroform, and you'll go off as easy as getting to sleep of a night. And when you wake, they hope that there'll be good news for you, my dear, and that, as I say, you'll soon be about again, scolding and vexing us and making our lives a burden, as you've always done, God bless you. There, Maria, I can manage my jokes still, and I'm mistaken if I don't see you smiling at me, same as ever." She had smiled, but she grew grave again.
I want to know it all, Eddie, my dear, she said. There's nothing you can tell me, as I shall fear more than what I guess. Do they think it's the cancer? No, they don't say that, he said. But they've got to see what it is. They're not going to think anything yet, until they see. Thank you, dearie, for telling me so gentle, she said. I declare it's a relief to me to have it spoken. And when is it to be? They said something about tomorrow. But that's as you please, Maria. But, my dear, there's no use in putting it off. Better have done with it. No, I wish as it could have been today. But what a lot of trouble the inside is, as I said to Dora on Saturday. Eddie, my dear, I'm such a coward. You've all got to be brave for me. It's a lot of worry I'm giving. But it's not my fault as far as I know. I've lived clean and wholesome. It's a thing as is sent to one. Law, my dear, you're crying. Now let's have no sadness in this house. It would be shame on us if we couldn't take our bit of trouble like men and women, instead of like a pig as squeals before you touch it. But what an upset. There's you, my dear, wishing it was you, and there's me, being so glad it's not you. We shan't agree about that, Mr. O. And now, my dear, if you'll say a bit of a prayer, same as we've always said together every morning, you and I, before going down to our breakfast, and then let's have Dora and Claude in, and have a bit of a chat. Our Father, my dear. We don't want more than that. It's what we've always said together of a morning, and it hasn't taken us far wrong yet. There was silence a little after that was said, and then Lord Osborne got up. And if I haven't forgot to kiss you good morning, my dear, he said. Well, that's that. And shall I fetch Dora and Claude? And what about Mrs. Pass out, I know. He left early this morning from Grota and had business in the city, which he said would keep him to lunch. Maria, my dear, my vote's against Mrs. Wouldn't she feel left out? Asked his wife. Well, she'd feel no more than is the case, said he. Give me Mrs. my dear, when there's Shakespeare or Chopin ahead, but not now. Such grimaces as she's been making in the Italian room. You'd have thought her face was a bit of string, and she trying to tie knots in it. No, Mrs. O. I'll fetch Dora and Claude, and that's all you get me to do. You may ring the bell for Mrs. but not me. Well, perhaps it would be more comfortable, said she, without Lizzie, if you're sure as she won't feel she should have been sent for. I don't feel to want any antics today. He stood by the bed a moment before going. I've never loved you like today, he said. Well, that's good hearing, she said, but you repeat yourself, Eddie. I've heard you say that before, my dear. And it was always true, said he. The moment he had left the room she called to the nurse. Now make me tidy, nurse, she said, and if you'd smooth the bedclothes, and a pillow more, my dear, would make me look a little more brisk-like and fit for company. There's Lady Dora coming, so pretty and so sweet to me, and my son Claude, her husband. My hair's all anyhow, so if you just put a brush to it, and there's a couple of rings on the dressing table, which I'll put on. Handsome, aren't they, diamonds and rubies? Thank you, nurse, and we're only just in time. Come in, my dears, come in and welcome. Such a way to receive you, she said. But there, why apologize? For if I didn't always say my bedroom was the pleasantest room in the house. Dora, my dearie, you've taken good care of Mr. O, and thank you, and he's so pleased with you that I'm on the way to be jealous. You wait till I'm about again, and see if I don't cut you out. Mr. O, do you hear that? Dora's got no chance against me, when I'm not a guy like this, lying in my bed. And you sit there, Dora, and Claude by you, as should be, and Mr. O on the other side. There's a nice comfortable party, what I like. What's this talk of a guy? Said Claude. You look famous, mother. Well, then, My looks don't belie me. Who shouldn't look famous with her friends and family coming to see her like this? Dora, my dear, you've got to take my place today, if you'd be so kind, for there's the concert this evening, and I won't have it put off. Law, I shall be here, as comfortable as ever I was, with my door open, and listening, and feel that I was with you all, wearing my new tiara and shaking hands. No, my dear, there's no sense in putting it off. Such nonsense. I've asked our friends to come and see us this evening, and them as feel inclined shall come, if my word is anything. But we'll be a woman short at dinner, thanks to my silliness. I wonder if Lady Austell would be able to come, for there's the savoury of prawns as she took twice of last time she dined with us. I bid her to the party, I know, but not to dinner, I think. Claude, do you go and telephone to her now for me, and you, Mr. O, go down and help him, and I'll chat to Dora the while. There was no mistaking the intention of this diplomacy, and the two men left the room. Then Lady Osborne turned to Dora. My dear, she said, you'll have heard all there is to know. And I just want to tell you that I'm facing it okay, as Claude says. There'll be nothing on my part to make anybody else shake and tremble. But you'll have an eye to your dad, dear. He feels it more than me, though God knows, I'm coward enough really. It's got to be, and though I hate the thought of the knife, well, my dear, those as are born into the world and have the pleasure of it have to take the troubles as well as the joys. And if they find the worst, I'm prepared for that, as long as I know you'll stick to Mr. O and help him. And there's Claude, too. Sometimes I've thought you've not been so happy together as I could have wished. I don't know what is wrong, but I've thought sometimes as all isn't quite right. I wanted to say just that to you. That was why I sent them down together, so crafty. But he loves you, my dear, and you can't do more than love. And you're going to bear him a child, please God. My dear, that's the best thing God ever thought of, if I may say so, for us women. I've had 2, bless them, and I should have liked to have had 100. I'd have borne each one with thanksgiving. She was silent a moment. Claude's a kind lad, she said. He takes after father. And he loves you, too. I'm not presuming, I hope, my dear. That's all that's been on my mind, and I wanted to get it said. You'll forgive an old woman as is your boy's mother. Thank you, my dear, for giving me that kiss. I'll treasure that. I'll think of that when they send me off to sleep tomorrow. The others came back at this moment with the news that Lady Austell would come to dinner. Now that's nice for your brother, said Lady Osborne. He'll like to find his mamma here. Dora had telephoned to Jim to say she would come and see him after lunch. Since receiving his note that morning, she had given but little thought to what he might have to say to her, for these other events banished all else from her mind. In spite of that which lay before them all, she could hardly feel sad, she could hardly feel anxious, for the noble simplicity and serenity of the other three infected her, to the exclusion of all else, with its own peace. She had not got to comfort anybody, to make any effort herself. She was lifted off her feet and borne along in these beautiful shining waters of courage and quietness. Indeed, it seemed to her that no one was making any effort at all. She did not find her father-in-law sitting with his head in his hands, and rousing himself, when she came in, to a semblance of cheerfulness. She did not see Claude trying to suppress signs of emotion. They all behaved quite naturally. At first it amazed her, for she knew, at any rate, that there was no lack of love and tenderness in either of them. It seemed that they must be exerting some stupendous control over themselves. Then she saw, slowly but surely, how wide of the mark such an explanation was. They were exerting no control at all. They behaved like that because they felt like that, because their attitude toward life and death and love was serene and large and quiet. All these months it had been there for her to see, but, inexplicably blind as she now felt she had been, she had needed this demonstration of it before she began, even faintly, to understand. It was no wonder, then, that Jim's affairs had been obliterated from her mind, but now as she entered that flat,
She wondered what he wanted that should make him wish to see her in this appointed way. For a moment, with a sickening qualm, she went back to that quarter of an hour's suspense on Saturday morning, when she had allowed herself to fear that he was connected in some hideous fashion with the check Claude could not recollect about. That had haunted her afterward, too, when she lay long awake at Grota on Saturday night. But Claude had said so emphatically that the check was all right, that she felt her fear to be fanciful. Meantime Jim did not yet know about Lady Osborne, and as soon as she entered she told him. "Oh, Jim," she said, "we are in trouble. Lady Osborne has got to have an operation. There is something wrong, and they want to see what it is. There is a growth of some sort. And, oh, I have been so blind, so blind. They are all behaving so splendidly, and yet behavior is the wrong word. They behave splendidly just because they are splendid. I never guessed they were like that. I'll tell you all about it. But first, what did you want to see me about? You don't look well, dear. What is it?" "I'm all right," said he. "But what is it?" asked Dora again, vaguely frightened. Jim leaned forward, with his elbows on his knees, propping his head on his hands. This was worse than the telling of Claude had been, but it had to be done. He had promised some humble, sorry little denizen within him that he would do it. "Did Claude speak to you about a check?" he asked, "which he could not remember drawing?" "Yes, and then afterward he said it was all right," said she. "Then I've got to tell you," he said. Then her fear seized her again in full force. "Don't, Jim," she cried. "Don't tell me there's anything wrong." "It's no use beating about," he said. "I forged that check and cashed it. Claude knows, I told him." Dora sat still a moment. Then she put her hands up to her head. "Open the window," she said. "I am stifling." He got up and threw open the window away from the street. Then he walked over to the chimney-piece and leaned his elbows on it, with his back to her. At first Dora felt nothing but hard anger and indignation, and she knew that if she spoke at all it would be to say something which could do no good, and perhaps only make a breach between them that could never be healed. And it was long that she waited, it was long before any spark of pity for him was lit. Then she spoke. "Oh, Jim, what a miserable business," she said. "But why did you tell me? Couldn't you have spared me knowing? Or perhaps you were afraid Claude would tell me." "No, I don't tell you for that reason," he said. "After I saw Claude this morning, I knew he would never tell you." "Why, then?" "Because I want to tell you about Claude. It may do some good. Well, Claude's treated me in a way that's beyond my understanding. He is beyond your understanding, too, at present, and that's why I am telling you. I wish you could have been here when I told him. He was only sorry for me. If he was God, he couldn't have been more merciful. And it wasn't put on. He felt it, and I wanted, for once, to see if I couldn't be of some use." He turned round and faced her. "I want you to know what sort of a fellow Claude really is," he said. "I know you don't get on well, and that's because you don't know him. You judged him first by his face, that, and perhaps a little bit by his wealth. And then you judged him by what you and I call vulgarity and want of breeding. That's not Claude either. Claude's the fellow who treated a swindler and a forger in the way I've told you. He's got a soul that's more beautiful than his face, you know, and he's the handsomest fellow I ever saw. I wanted you to get a glimpse of it. It might help things. That's all I've got to say. I'm sorry for giving you the pain of knowing what I've done, but I thought it might do good. He's just broken me up with his goodness. That's Claude." The anger was quite gone now, and it was a tremulous hand that Dora laid on his shoulder. "Oh, Jim," she said, "thank you, I am so sorry for you, you know, and I'm grateful. I shall go back and tell Claude I know, and thank him, and be sorry."
Yes, that is the best thing you can do, said Jim. Claude was alone in their sitting room when she got back, and, as he always did, he rose from his chair as she entered. For a moment she stood looking at him, mute, beseeching. Then she came to him. "Thank you about Jim, dear," she said. "He has just told me about it, to make me see what you were. Oh, Claude, I didn't know." And then the tears came. But his arm was around her, and her head lay on his shoulder. Chapter 12. Uncle Alf was seated with Dora on the terrace at Grota one afternoon late in August. Dora herself was hatless and cloakless, for it was a day of windless and summer heat, but Uncle Alf had an overcoat on, and a very shabby old grey shawl in addition cast about his shoulders. His face wore an expression of ludicrous malevolence. "And I had to come out here, my dear, and take refuge with you," he said, "for Maria will drive me off my head with talk of that tumor of hers. Why, she speaks as if nobody had ever had a tumor before. I said to her, 'Maria, if it had been cancer now, and you'd got over as you have, it might have been something to make a tale of. But tumor, God bless me. And benignant, so Sir Henry said, at that.'" Dora gave a little shriek of laughter. "Uncle Alf, sometimes I think you're the unkindest man in the whole world," she said, "and even when you're most unkind I can't help laughing. I wonder if you are unkind really. I don't expect so." Uncle Alf took no notice of this, and went on with his grievances. "As for Eddie, I'm sure I don't know what to make of him," he said. "I shouldn't wonder if he's going soft-headed, for he was always threatened that way, to my thinking. He can talk of nothing but the brave and beautiful Maria. Lord! My dear, it's a wonder to me that you can stand it. Doesn't it get on your nerves? Doesn't it make you feel sick and ill to hear how they go on?" Dora laughed again. "No, Uncle Alf, it doesn't, do you know? You see, I was with them through all those dreadful days in the summer after the operation, when they still didn't know what it was for certain, and had to make an examination, and it made a tremendous impression on me. I always used to think that they all, including Claude, were very ordinary people. Well, they're not. They were very wonderful. They were cheerful, even when they were waiting for a verdict that might have been so terrible." "Bah," said Uncle Alf. "Yes, if you wish. They used to get on my nerves, that is quite true, and you gave me a hint about it once which was very useful. You told me to see the humorous side of Dad and Mother." "Lord, it's Dad and Mother, is it?" said Alf, in a tone of acid disgust. "Yes, Dad and Mother. Just as you are Uncle Alf, but I'll call you Mr. Osborne if you prefer. Very well, then, I took that hint, and sometimes now I laugh at them, which I never did before. I often laugh at them now, and let them see me laughing, and Dad says to Mother, 'There's Dora at her jokes again. What have you said?' They know how I love them. Dear, don't make such awful faces. They were so splendid, you know." "And Claude?" asked his uncle, after a pause. "I didn't do justice, or anything like it, to Claude till then," she said. "He used to get on my nerves, too, very badly indeed. I don't mind telling you, since I've told him, and we've laughed over that. But all that time in July, combined with something very fine that I found out he had done, made me see that what got on my nerves did not matter in the least. What mattered was Claude himself, whom I didn't know before." "I love that boy," said Uncle Alf, with unusual tenderness, "and I'm glad you do, my dear, because he deserves all the love you can give him. But I am glad you laugh at him, too. There's no sense in not seeing the ridiculous side of people." "Oh yes, I laugh at him often," said Dora. "I think he likes it. You see, he's so dreadfully fond of me that he likes all I do." Uncle Alf gave a contemptuous sniff. "Yes, he's off his head about you," he said. I thought he had more sense. But there's very little sense in anybody when you come to know them. I know, it's foolish of him, said Dora. I tell him so. But then I'm foolish about him. I expect if two people are foolish about each other, they can stand a lot of the other's folly, though I expect it isn't grammar. It is rather nice to be foolish about a man, if he happens to be your husband. It seems to me you married him first, and fell in love with him afterward, said Uncle Alf. That's exactly what I did do, said Dora softly. And what's this fine thing Claude did? Asked the other. Gave a cabman a sovereign, I suppose, and told him to keep the change. Much he'd miss it. And you thought that was devilish noble, eh? I can't tell you what it was, said she. Nobody must know that. Uncle Alf was silent a minute. He wanted to say something ill-tempered but could not think of anything. Well, I'm glad the boy's done something to deserve you, my dear, he said. Though that sounds as if I was getting soft-headed, too, and perhaps I am, joining like this in this chorus of praise, this domestic symphony. But I can stand you and Claude. What I can't stand is Eddie and Maria. Lord! If they aren't coming out here, when I thought I had escaped. She in her bath chair, and he pushing it. A man of his age, and as stout as that. He'll be bursting himself one of these days, and then we shall have Maria making us all sick with telling us how beautifully he bore it, and nobody behaved so bravely over a burst as her Eddie. Dora giggled hopelessly. Oh, you are such a darling, she said. I don't mind what you say. The bath chair had approached, and Lady Osborne put down her sunshade as they came into the strip of shadow where Dora and Uncle Alf Saturday. He edged away from her as far as the angle of the house and the flower beds would permit. Well, and if this isn't pleasant, she said. Eddie, my dear, we'll stop here a bit and have a rest, if we're not interrupting, and indeed it's near tea time, and I want my tea badly today, I do. But my appetite's been so good since my operation. Alf broke in. Maria, if I hear any more about you and your operation, I leave the house, he said. Well, and I'm sure that's the last thing I want you to do, said Lady Osborne genially, for I'm enjoying this little family party such as never was. Why, all the time I was getting better in London I was looking forward to it, and dreamed about it too. There now, Alf, don't be so tetchy, stopping your ears in that manner, as if you had the neuralgia and were sitting in a draught. I was only going to say I'd been looking forward to a week or two of quiet down here with you all, and pleased I was to know that you would join us, instead of setting on Richmond Hill with the motors and all buzzing round you and raising clouds of dust with germs uncountable. Mr. O, my dear, you're all of a perspiration with pushing me, and thank you. Won't you be wise to put a wrap on, same as your brother does, when he sits out of doors, especially with you in that heat? No, my dear, I'm comfortable enough. I was only wondering whether Dora was wise to sit here in that thin dress. It'll strike chill before sunset. Dora again burst out laughing. Dad, we shall drive Uncle Alf off his head if we all think so much about each other, she said. He's been making a formal complaint to me about it. He finds us all very trying. And where's Claude and Jim? Asked Alf. I hope they're taking great care of each other. Claude cut his finger this morning, and he bore it wonderfully. Never a cry nor a sob. But I wonder at you, Maria, letting them ride horses all about the country, without a doctor or a pair of surgeons to follow them in case of accidents. They might fall off and be hurt. A savage and dangerous beast is a horse, and more especially a mare, such as Claude was riding. Lady Osborne entirely refused to notice the sarcastic intent of this. Well, to be sure, we've all got to take our risks, she said. There'd be no sense in passing your life wrapped up in cotton wool and waiting for the doctor. Why, and you used to ride too, when you was a lad, Alf, said her husband. You're making Dora laugh at you. And I don't wonder, I could laugh myself. Alf got up from his chair. "I think you'd both be the better for an operation, you and Maria," he said. "I should have a bit of humor put in, instead of a bit of tumor taken out. Not but what it's a far more serious affair. I doubt if either of you would get over it." "Well, and it's you who talked about my tumor this time," said Lady Osborne triumphantly. This was too much for Alf. He walked shufflingly back to the house, leaving his sister-in-law in possession of the field. But she used her victory nobly, with pity for the conquered. Lady Osborne looked round in a discreet and penetrating manner after he had gone and was out of hearing. "Dora, my dear, you mustn't mind what Alf says," she remarked with much acuteness. "He gets a bit sour now and then, and I'm sure I don't wonder, with his lumbago, and no one to look after him. If only he had found a nice girl to look after him when he was young. Poor old Alf! But you can take it from me as knows him, he doesn't really mean all he says. It's his joke, and I'm not one to quarrel with a joke, and bless him, why shouldn't he joke in his own way just as the rest of us do? And if sometimes he seems a bit ill-humored over his joke, well, you let him get his bit of ill-humor off his mind, and he'll be all the better for it. I never take no notice, and it don't hurt me. Alf and his joke, I say over to myself, and no harm done." "Rum old cove is Alf," said her husband. "He seems sometimes to want to quarrel with us all. But it takes two to make a quarrel, and he'll have hard work to find the second in this house, if I know who lives in it. And he was just as anxious as he could be, Maria, when you was at your worst in the summer, telephoning 5 and 6 times in the day, till I said down the tube, 'Maria's love, and she's asleep till morning.' And what it'll be when Dora here." "Mr. O, you go too far," said his wife in a shrill aside. "But as you were saying about Alf, if there's crust outside there's crumb within. It's a soft heart like your own, Mr. O, though he don't know it." "Dad, when last were you angry with anybody?" asked Dora. "Can you remember?" Lord Osborne considered this. It was a question that required research. "Well, my dear, if you leave out things like my being angry with the mother for giving us all such a fright last July, there's one for you, Maria, I couldn't rightly say. I had a dishonest foreman I remember at the works whom I had to dismiss, summary, too, one Monday morning, but I think I was more sorry for his wife and children than I was angry with him. 9 children there was, and another expected, poor lamb. And stillborn when it came, for I inquired." Dora saw Lady Osborne shoot out a furtive finger at him, and he understood. "Then I was angry with Claude one day," he continued, "when he was a little lad. I think the devil must have been in the boy, for what must he do but rake out the fire from his mother's drawing-room grate, and dump it all on the hearthrug. And yet I could scarce help laughing even when I gave him his spanking. What was in the boy's head that he should think of a trick like that? Perhaps it was his joke, too, something that looks mischievous at first, like old Alf's jokes. I'll take another cup of tea, mother, for here's Claude coming with Jim, and such a teapot drainer as Claude I never saw." "Yes, I doubt he'll injure his stomach," said Lady Osborne, "for I'm told that tea tans the coats of it like so much leather. Sir Henry told me so when we were having a chat one morning, after he'd dressed the place for me." "Well, the less we know about our insides the better, to my way of thinking," said her husband, "until there's some call to see what's going on. Eat your dinner and drink your wine and get your sleep of nights, and you've done what you can to keep it contented. And I'm sure none's got a better right to tell us how to keep well than you, my dear," said Lady Osborne appreciatively. "For bar a bit of gout now and then, as it isn't reasonable you should be spared, there's not an hour's anxiety your health's given me since first we met, Mr. O, and here's the boys ready for their tea, I'll be bound. Old Alf, and his saying that he wondered at me allowing them to go horseback." All this, these quiet ordinary domestic conversations, as well as things of far greater import, had entirely changed in character for Dora. But it was for her only that they had changed. In themselves they were exactly as they had been before there came those days which, so she put it to herself,
had opened her eyes and given sight to them. For she had labeled them trivial or tiresome, according as her own mood had varied, and though discussion on subjects of high artistic or spiritual import was not rare but unknown among the Osbornes, she had now the sense to see that the kindly utterances of simple people possibly illustrated though they did not allude to qualities that were not at all trivial. For she saw now the personalities that lay behind these details of their life, the hearts out of which the mouths spoke. It was that which gave its tone to what had become music, and if Lord Osborne lingered in his cellar to find a bottle of wine that Sir Thomas appreciated, it was no longer Sir Thomas's undoubted greediness that concerned her, but his host's desire that his guest should enjoy himself. And she knew now that the spirit which did not think it trivial to see that the dinner was good, or that the wine was plentiful, was perfectly capable of rising to higher levels than these. When there was a call for courage, courage of a very wonderful sort had answered. When endurance was needed, endurance was there. When charity, as in the case of Jim, the charity that met the difficult and disgraceful situation was complete, and had all the fineness and delicacy which only perfect simplicity can give. How Claude had done it she did not know. There seemed no question of finesse or of diplomatic behavior. He had merely behaved without difficulty, like Claude, and but a few weeks afterward there was Jim, sensitive and highly strung as he always was, staying with them all, not like a guest, but as one of the family, as Lady Osborne loved to think. And it was not that he was lacking in the sense of shame that made his friendship with Claude possible. It was that he, like Dora, had had his eyes opened. A heart as kind as Claude's counted for something after all. They both, it must be supposed, had taken it for granted until it was shown them. But the sight of it, the practical knowledge of it, worked the miracle, worked it easily, as if there was no miracle about it. Dora had gone to her room shortly after tea to rest, on the diplomatic prompting of her mother-in-law. With so many gentlemen present, Lady Osborne would never have said, "Dora, the doctor told you to rest for a couple of hours before dinner," but she had reminded her that she had several letters to write for the post. And Dora, secretly and kindly smiling, had remembered at once, though, like the almug trees, there were no such letters. And with her to her room she took up the parcel of thought that has been indicated, for she wanted to examine its contents a little more closely before Claude came up, as he always did, to read to her for a while before she dressed. Right at the bottom of the packet, she knew, there lay something very precious. She would look at that by and by, with him perhaps. But in spite of the preponderance that qualities of the heart had now gained in her mind compared to what must be called qualities of the surface, to which belonged such things as beauty and breeding, she found that the latter had not at all lost their value. But she saw such things differently. They had assumed, so it seemed to her, not a truer value, but the true value. She loved Claude's beauty more than even in those enchanted days of honeymoon in Venice, not only now because it was beauty, but because it was Claude's, while such superficial failings as were undoubtedly his she laughed at still, but now without bitterness or irritation. They were funny. To say a handsome lady was still ludicrous, but now, since it was Claude who said it, it could not help being lovable. Indeed, she and Jim had invented what they called the Claude Catechism, which began, "Are you a handsome lady? No, but I am a perfect gentleman." And then Claude would throw whatever was handiest at Jim's head. And how, like Pharaoh, had she at one time hardened her heart, refusing to give admittance, so it seemed to her now, to that sunshine of beautiful qualities that was always ready to stream in upon her. He had never failed her, he had always been patient, waiting for the door to open, for the closed windows to be unbarred. True, in the early days he thought they had been unbarred, that he had full admittance, but in the weeks that followed, when it was clear to him that ingress was given him no longer, he had waited without bitter thought of her. She had made him, after their reconciliation, try to explain what he had felt to her, and he had done it, unwillingly, but not failing to answer her questions. "You see, it was like this, darling," he had said. "I saw something was wrong, and I tried to find out if I had done anything, or how I could set things right. But it didn't seem to me that I had altered at all, at least I knew I hadn't, toward you, from the time that you said you loved me, and so the best thing I could do was just to keep on at that. I thought of all sorts of things, tried to wonder at your reasons for not being pleased with me. But that was no use. I'd always been myself to you, and I thought you might care for me again later on. Of course, I suppose it was in a selfish way. I was glad when poor old Jim made such a mistake, because that gave me an opportunity, you see, to, well, treat him decently. Not that I ever thought it would get to your ears. However, it did. Jim was a trump over that, going and telling you. I didn't mean him to, but when it happened like that, I couldn't help being pleased. You had been a bit hard on me, you know, thank God you were, for it makes it better now that you are not. Lord, what a jaw! This was the outcome of her talk with him, but the jaw was punctuated by questions of hers. It was another Claude catechism. But this one was not funny, nor had Jim any part in it. Yes, she had separated this man who loved her into packets. There was her mistake. First she had loved his beauty, and then had taken that for granted. Next she had felt growingly irritated with all in him that did not correspond to the particular little tricks of conversation and life in which she had been brought up. Then she had got accustomed to those sterling qualities which she had taken for granted from the first. And then had come the little more, and how much it was. He had but shown, in practical demonstration, that he was kind and brave and reliable, all that she had thought she had given him credit for at first. But the effect was immense. She fell in love, at first real sight, with his qualities. That fused the whole. At last she was in love with the man, not with his face, not with his character taken by itself, but with him as a whole. That splendid body was his too were the greater splendors of character, and if his also were the things dealt with in the public Claude catechism, they were no longer rejected, they were no longer even accepted, they were welcomed and hugged. The reason for this was plain. It was Claude who said and did all that which was symbolized under the title of handsome lady, and since it was Claude, it was a thing to be kissed, though laughter came too. He was no longer packets, they were fused into one dear whole, the thought of which and the presence of which made her heart ache with tenderness. And now, thinking of these things, she had a thirsty eye for the opening of the door, a thirsty ear for the sound of his foot in the passage outside. But she knew he would not come quite yet, for at tea some silly discussion had arisen between him and Jim as to whether it was possible to get, with a run, from the bottom of the terrace to the lake in 12 strides. Jim had been vehement on the impossibility of it, and though Claude cordially agreed that it was a feat of which Jim was pathetically incapable, he backed himself to do it for the sum of 1 shilling. Even now she could hear him running along the terrace below the window, and Jim's voice counting the strides. Dora got up and strolled on to her balcony. The last attempt had apparently been unsuccessful, for Claude was starting again, and next moment with great strides his long legs were taking him across the grass that sloped down to the lake. This time it looked as if he would easily succeed, for the 6th leap had taken him well beyond the half-distance. The 11th took him within a couple of yards of the edge, and next moment Dora joined in the shout of laughter that came from Jim. For it had not apparently occurred to Claude what happened next, if you leap at top speed to the margin of a lake. But he knew now, as he vanished in a fountain of spray. It was the deep end of the lake too. Jim had collapsed altogether on the ground by the time Claude swam to shore, and Dora was equally helpless on the balcony. But by the time the involuntary bather had wrung his clothes out, Jim had recovered sufficiently to find the shilling he had lost to him. "Oh, it was cheap at the price," he said. "I wish it had been a florin." Claude walked up the terrace to the house, leaving a trail of water on the paving stones, and in a moment his dressing-room door opened with a crack, and a head and naked shoulder came round the corner. "Darling, I've been making a fool of myself," he said. "I must change first, and then shall I come in to read to you?" "Yes, do," she said, still laughing. "I saw it. I thought I should have a fit. Can't you do it again before you change? It was too heavenly." "Yes, if you wish," said he. "But I shall have to put on my wet clothes again." She laughed again. No, there would be no first fine careless rapture the second time,
she said. What's that? Asked Claude. Nothing. Browning. Change, and then come and read to me. It was not long before he joined her, and seated himself on the floor by the side of the sofa where she lay, with his back against it. The book he was reading was Osbornes, and that evening they came to the chapter in which Harry comes home, on December 29th, and goes to the service in Winchester Cathedral. And Claude read. She gave him her hand, her little fair hand. There was only her marriage ring on it. The quarrel was all over. The year of grief and estrangement had passed. They had never been separated. Dora's hand lay on her husband's arm, and he felt a soft pressure of her fingers. "Oh, Claude," she said, "how nice. He was so faithful and patient, and it all came right." He let the book fall to the ground. As soon as she spoke he ceased to think of Osbornes, and though Dora's words referred to him, she was not thinking of him either. They had never been separated, she went on, still quoting, but still not thinking of the book. They hadn't really been separated, because their love was present all the time, but she had let it get covered up with irritation and impatience. Was it like that it happened? "I can't remember," he said. "Indeed I cannot. Everything seems unreal that isn't perfect." "And there is something more coming," she said, "coming soon, perhaps in a few days now. So tonight, dear, let us talk a little instead of reading even that beautiful chapter. I am glad we got to it today. I like stopping just at those very words, and I want you to tell me just once, what really I know so well, that you feel as if we had never been separated, that you forgive all my stupidity and shallowness. I want to let it all pass from my mind forever, to know that I needn't ever reproach myself any more. I think I have learned my lesson, I do indeed. Just tell me, if you can, that you think I have." He had turned himself about as she spoke, and now instead of sitting he knelt by her side, she leaning on her elbow toward him. In the humility of the simple words, there was something exquisite to him. They flooded his heart with a tender protectiveness. "Oh, my darling, you say that to me. Indeed, indeed, I never reproached you." Dora was still grave. "I know that," she said, "but I reproached myself. How could I help it? But, Claude, the sting has gone out of my self-reproach. I can't help it, it has. You have to tell me, if you truly can, that I needn't barb it again." He saw she wanted the direct answer. "You need not," he said. "And I think you cannot. You can't make an old bruise ache again when it is well." "Then it has gone," she said. "Pull me up, dear, with those strong hands." He raised her to her feet, and she clung to him a moment. "Oh, Claude, it is getting near the best time of all," she said. "Your mother once told me that to bear a child was the best thing God ever thought of for women. Oh dear! And she was so funny at tea. Dad said something about a foreman he had discharged with 9 children and another coming, and she pulled him up. How beautifully laughter and the biggest things in the world go together. They don't interfere with one another in the least. Lord, and to think that once I used to believe you weren't respectful enough to Dad and her," said he. "And you were quite right. I can laugh at them now I love them. It's that which makes the difference." She strolled to the window. "Let's come out on the balcony for a little," she said. "What an evening!" The sun had set, but not long, and in the west a flash of molten red lay along the horizon. That melted into orange, which again faded into pale green. Higher up the sky was a velvet blue, and little wisps of feathery cloud flushed with rose color were flecked over it. The stars were already lit, and some noble planet near to its setting flamed jewel-like in that green strip of sky. Already the colors were half withdrawn from the garden beds, but a hint of the flower presences came to them in the little fragrant breeze that fluttered moth-like in the stillness. Beyond lay the lake,
screened from the glory of sunset by the tall clumps of rhododendrons on its far side, and in the shadow the water was dark and steel-like in tone. Birds still chuckled in the bushes, and from far away came the pulse of some hurrying train. And in the hush and quiet of the hour they spoke together of the dear event that was coming and would not be long delayed. "So I wanted," she said at last, "to clear everything off my mind which could make me look backward. I want nothing to exist for me except you and our love for each other. Even Dad and Mother must get a little dim. I can't explain." "I think I understand very well," said he. "And you won't be frightened for me, Claude?" she asked. "Yet I needn't ask you. I saw what you were when Mother was ill." He did not answer. "What then, dear?" asked Dora. "Well, it's you see, now," he said. "I can't help it. But I'll do my best." A week more passed quietly enough. Lady Austell arrived, and that somehow was the last straw for Uncle Alf, for she was so extraordinarily appropriate, and he persuaded Jim to come back to Richmond with him. Lady Austell had very thoughtfully let the house at Deal most advantageously for the whole month of September, and intended to have a nice long stay at Grota. Really, it was quite too wonderful that Dora's baby should be born at Grota. It was a clear case of special providence. Then came a day when the house was very still, and the hot hours passed with leaden foot. To Claude it seemed that the morning would never pass to noon, and when noon was over each hour the more seemed an eternity twice told. But just before sunset there was heard the cry of a child. Later, he was allowed to see Dora for a moment, and in a cot by her bed, tiny and red and crumpled, lay that which had come into the world. "Oh, Claude," she said softly, as he came up to her bed, "all three of us, you and your son and I."